Chapter 962. According to the system's evaluation, this income is the host's unexpected gain. According to international practice, 20% of the unexpected income tax will be levied. After tax, the total income will be 252 million copper coins. In order to prevent the host from not doing his job properly and giving up his dream of becoming the god of cookery to rob others, this amount of money can only be used to purchase 0.5 strength points. The system's voice sounded. Scram. Do you think you're the world's policeman? You're so nosy. You're even collecting the unexpected income tax for a gourmet system. Meg pursed his lips. The system was getting more and more shameless. Still want 315 million copper coins for 0.5 points of physical strength. Why don't you go rob someone? I earned this money with my own ability. Why should I be discriminated against? Meg was indignant. Host, please take note. This money was earned with your daughter's ability. It has nothing to do with you. The system deeply regrets your behavior of taking advantage of a child. The system said sternly. Meg opened his mouth, but found that the system's words made sense. This money was indeed earned with Amy's ability. I got my daughter with my own ability. Why can't I take advantage of her? Meg quickly convinced himself and said righteously. System, you're short of money, right? Meg calmed down and asked with a smile. The system is indeed short of money recently. The system's voice suddenly weakened by more than half. If you're short of money, just say it. Really, who are we? Here's 310 million copper coins. Take it all and spend it all. Meg said forthrightly. Really? The system's voice trembled slightly. Of course. With our relationship, why would I lie to you? Just give me 20 points of interest every month. Meg nodded with a smile. The system was silent for a while, then roared, Host. You've completely exceeded the scope of a loan shark. This is simply extortion. Don't be so agitated. Isn't this a matter of mutual consent? I'm not forcing you. Look at how beautiful this gem is. Once it's sold, it'll be shiny gold coins. It'll be enough to buy a lot of fertilizer and build a lot of greenhouses. When the vegetables are collected, it'll all be money spent. It'll be more than the interest. Meg continued to smile. The system fell silent again. Forget it if you don't want to lend it. I'll just leave it in the safe. There's nothing to spend money on anyway. Meg said with an indifferent expression. Host, can you lower the interest rate a little? 20 points of interest, isn't it too high? This is completely against the laws of the market. The system was silent for a long time before it said weakly. System, have you ever seen a loan shark to the rules of the market to pay? Although I'm a newbie, I have to have professional ethics, Mag said with a smile. Host, you're being ungrateful to me. I gave you a month's interest-free discount for the elephant food bar. Even if you don't pay it back in a month, the interest will only be 4 points. That's not a problem. I'll also give you a 5,000 interest-free limit. Moreover, I'll give you a 4-month interest-free discount. Isn't that better than your discount? However, the rest of the money will still be calculated according to the 20% interest. Meg smiled. The system fell silent again. Think about it. Of course, if you have any new ideas about the price of the strength points, you can talk to me. Meg said with a smile. He got up and walked towards the kitchen, ready to give Phyllis and Anna some advice. Ding. New mission. Please capture a fiery pig within 48 hours. Location, Red Dragon Island. Mission reward, red braised meat recipe. Mission failure, 1 strength point deducted. At this moment, the system's voice suddenly rang in Meg's mind. Fuck. System, is this a malicious revenge? Meg stopped in his tracks and raised his eyebrows. Host, please do not misinterpret the system's mission. Complete the mission as soon as possible and you will be rewarded. Treat the mission negatively and you will be punished. The system said seriously. Okay. I'll go. Meg pursed his lips. Speaking of red braised meat, he was still very interested. As a traditional delicacy, It was fatty but not greasy. The sweet and soft red braised meat was one of his favorites. When he ate it, he would have a spoonful of thick soup mixed with rice. Just thinking about the taste made him salivate. However, speaking of Red Dragon Island, 3 red dragons had just been defeated outside Mammoth today. Now, he had to go to their territory to catch a pig immediately. The provocation was indeed a little too strong. However, Shirley had said that there was only one 10th tier giant dragon in the Red Dragon tribe. If he brought RZ along, even if he couldn't win, it shouldn't be a problem for him to escape. However, Dragon Island wasn't too far away. If he made too much of a commotion, he was afraid that he would attract the attention of other giant dragons. After all, he still had the title of Dragon Slayer on his head now. It wasn't good to be too conspicuous on Dragon Island. Tomorrow happens to be a rest day. Seems like I have to make a trip to Dragon Island, Meg thought to himself. He wasn't too worried. Instead, he was a little expectant. He had long heard that Dragon Island was an archipelago formed by many floating islands. The giant dragons on the Norland continent all lived there. Each tribe had an island. The more powerful the tribe, the closer the island was to the center, and the larger the area. As for whether the system had a vengeful heart, Meg couldn't be bothered to find out. Who didn't have a temper? The more he looked at the system's exasperated look, the more comfortable he felt. Infuriating this kind of system to death. The serf had become the master. Meg entered the kitchen. Phyllis had just finished roasting a beef kebab. She looked at Meg nervously, and said, "Boss, can you try the beef kebab I made?" "You're already confident." Meg looked at the beef kebab in Phyllis's hand with a smile. The beef had just been picked up from the grill, and was still sizzling with oil. The fatty meat had been roasted into a translucent state, and the aroma wafted into his nose. From the outside, it was very close to perfection. Meg was a little surprised. He took the beef kebab, and took a bite. The delicious taste of the beef melted in his mouth, and his eyes lit up. The texture and taste of Phyllis's beef kebab were very close to perfection. It was just a little lacking in the heat control. However, if ordinary beef was replaced with iron copper beef, this flaw would be completely negligible. She could already cook beef kebab for him. Very good. It's ready to be served to customers. Meg nodded with satisfaction. He was indeed very satisfied. Big sister Phyllis is so awesome. Anna clapped her little hands. Is it really ready? Phyllis was still in disbelief. Yes. I didn't expect you to improve so much in just a few days. Meg nodded with a smile. I had a dream last night. In the dream, I kept making beef kebab. When I woke up today, I still remembered everything in the dream. That's why I could make it today. Phyllis said with a hint of embarrassment. I almost forgot that the system gave me a chance to enter the test field for the god of cookery. Meg nodded. No pop-up window. Chapter 963. Elizabeth, are you sure you want to challenge Fox to be the new chief of the Frost Dragon tribe? Douglas asked in a low voice as he looked down at Elizabeth, who was standing in the middle of the majestic hall made of ice and snow. Fox stood not far away from Elizabeth with excitement in his eyes. The 10 elders of the Frost Dragon tribe were all present, and the majestic hall was silent. The gazes of all the dragons landed on Elizabeth. Their expressions varied, but most of them were astonished. Elizabeth was the most powerful among the younger generation of the Frost Dragon tribe. She had just reached adulthood, and was already a 7th-tier giant dragon. She was not inferior to Rankster in the past. Many people thought that she was the best choice to be the next chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. However, Fox was an elder, after all. He was only 500 years old, and was in the prime of his life. He was also at the peak of the 9th tier, and was only a step away from the 10th tier. He had fought with Rankster for the position of chief in the past. Rankster had been missing for many years, and no one knew if he was dead or alive. As a member of the royal family, he was a strong candidate to be the chief successor. Elizabeth had returned to Dragon Island this time, and directly challenged the Great Elder to decide between the two of them to be the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. This decision was beyond everyone's expectations. Yes, I want to challenge him fair and square. Even if I die, I want to die fair and square. I don't want to die from dirty schemes and sneak attacks, Elizabeth said calmly as she looked up at Douglas. A dark look flashed across Fox's eyes, but his expression did not change at all. He had already received the news of those fellows' failure 2 days ago. He thought that his plan was foolproof, but he did not expect that he still could not get rid of Elizabeth. However, it did not matter. Since she wanted to challenge him, he did not mind fulfilling her wish and becoming the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe openly. Disdainful laughter rang out from the crowd, as if what Elizabeth said was a funny joke. Douglas looked at Elizabeth. Her deep blue eyes reminded him of Rankster in the past. That fellow became braver with every setback. He was defeated repeatedly, but could get up again every time. Now, his daughter was standing here again, challenging Fox, who was 2 ranks higher than her. She was just as laughable as Rankster, who had challenged him back then. After that, Rankster became the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe, and he stepped down to become the great elder of the Frost Dragon tribe. Was it laughable? Douglas did not think it was funny. It was just like how most of the people who were sitting here in the past ended up becoming Rankster's stepping stones. This was a serious matter. Also, Douglas heard something that he didn't like from Elizabeth's words. He glanced at Fox. This fellow was Rankster's half-brother, and Rankster had spared his life in the final battle. Now, he was trying to secretly kill her behind her back with dirty tricks. Fox lowered his eyes and did not respond. He had been waiting for this day for hundreds of years. A mixed-blood bastard had stolen the throne that should have belonged to him. Now that he was finally dead, how could he allow his daughter to sit on the throne that should have belonged to him? For this, he would do whatever it took. The second elder looked at Douglas and said, "Great elder, the position of the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe has been empty for many years. We have become the laughingstock of the other dragon tribes. Rankster is most likely dead. Fox and Elizabeth are the best candidates for the new chief. Since Elizabeth took the initiative to challenge Fox, I think it is feasible to decide the new chief through this duel." "I agree." 6 other elders raised their hands one after another. "I object." The 5th elder stood up and said to Douglas, "Great elder, Elizabeth is the most powerful person among the younger generation of the Frost Dragon tribe. She is also the most promising prodigy to reach the 10th tier in 100 years. She is still young, and her abilities are much weaker than Fox. This is not a fair duel at all. Even if the winner is decided, how can the others be convinced?" "I also agree with the 5th elder. Elizabeth is still young. Even if we want to duel, we have to wait for another few decades. We have to let her reach the 9th tier at least and be on the same level as Fox. Only then will the duel be acknowledged by all the members of the tribe. Let the other dragons be the laughingstock. How can it shake the position of the Frost Dragon tribe as one of the top 10 dragon tribes?" The 7th elder said as he stood up. "What a joke. If we wait for another few decades, won't the Frost Dragon tribe have to be without a chief for the next few decades? If Elizabeth can't break through to the 9th tier after a few hundred years, are we going to make Fox wait?" 5th elder, 7th elder, this is a challenge initiated by Elizabeth herself. What are you trying to do by objecting like this? The 2nd elder shouted at the 2 dragons. Enough. Douglas stopped everyone's quarrel. He looked at Fox and said, "Fox, do you dare to accept Elizabeth's challenge?" Fox raised his eyes and glanced at Elizabeth. Then, he looked at Douglas and respectfully said, "Since Elizabeth wants to challenge me to choose a new chief for the Frost Dragon tribe, Fox is willing to accept the challenge and bear all the consequences." "All right. The 2 of you will duel at the Frost battlefield tomorrow afternoon," Douglas said in a low voice. "Great elder." The 5th elder and 7th elder still wanted to say something. "It's settled. The Frost Dragon tribe has always spoken with our abilities." Douglas raised his hand, and then disappeared from the spot. The other elders also disappeared one after another. "Farewell, elders." Fox bowed. When he straightened his body, he was already full of smiles. He turned and walked towards Elizabeth. He stopped beside her, and smilingly said, "You shouldn't have come back. If you had hidden like your father, I really wouldn't have been able to do anything to you." One day, I will kill you. Elizabeth clenched her fist slowly, and turned to look at Fox calmly. Fox's expression froze, and then he sneered. He went closer to Elizabeth, and said, "But you don't have the chance now. I will kill you tomorrow." Fox turned and walked out of the hall. He opened his arms and transformed into a frost dragon. He flapped his wings and flew away. Father said that as long as I'm alive, there's still a chance. In the empty hall, Elizabeth opened her right hand, and a frost dragon sauce that emitted a cold aura appeared in her palm. "Father, where are we going today?" Amy, who was riding on Meg's neck, asked excitedly. They had left the city early in the morning, and were now walking on a small path in the mountains. Chapter 964. Translator, Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations keep a low profile. Z. Page 11. We are going to Dragon Island today to catch a pig. After that, we will come back to make some delicious red braised pork for Amy, Meg said with a smile. After some consideration, he still decided to bring Amy along. After all, there was only one day off a week, so he had to bring Amy out to have some fun. The fiery pig was a type of magic beast that only lived on Fire Dragon Island. It was the red dragon's favorite food. It evolved from the unique volcanic environment of Fire Dragon Island, and had 4th-tier power. Even the current Meg could easily deal with a 4th-tier power. However, Dragon Island was such an interesting place. It was not a bad idea to bring Amy along to see the world. Anyway, RZ was around, so there shouldn't be any dangerous situations. If they couldn't beat them, they could just avoid them. Dragon Island. Amy's eyes lit up. Then, she asked expectantly, "Then, are we going to look for little RZ now? I love RZ the most." "Yes. Dragon Island is very far from Chaos City. We have to rely on RZ to get there." Meg nodded with a smile. If it wasn't for RZ, they would have to spend more than 48 hours on the road, let alone catching a fiery pig. Meg carried Amy up the mountain. When they were about halfway up the mountain, he helped Amy and himself change into clothes and put on masks. After that, he took out a small whistle from his pocket and blew hard into it. It made a long and thin whistle that sounded like the chirping of a bird. After a while, a purple-striped griffin flew out from the cave at the top of the mountain, and swooped straight down. It circled around Meg and Amy happily before landing lightly on the ground. It rubbed its head against Meg's hand. Amy reached out her little hand with a smile, and said, "Be good, RZ. Give me your head and let me stroke it." A vigilant look appeared in RZ's eyes immediately. When it saw Amy's smile gradually disappearing, it stretched its head over again as if its head would explode if it was a second later. "Good girl," Amy said with a smile as she patted RZ's head. RZ's expression changed from vigilance to enjoyment. She turned over and revealed her belly. "No matter what, you are still a 10th-tier griffin. Can't you be a little more mature?" Meg said helplessly. However, looking at the two kids playing happily, a smile appeared on his face. "All right, let's set off. The Dragon Island is still quite far away." Meg smiled as he picked up Amy. RZ flipped over again, and Meg jumped onto the back of the griffin. With a flap of his powerful wings, he soared into the sky and flew straight into the sea of clouds. Then, he flew toward the south. The Dragon Island was located directly south of Chaos City. The wilderness, which was filled with all kinds of magic beasts, was like a natural barrier that stopped most people from going to the Dragon Island. Giant dragons disdained to explore the wilderness. Dragon Island was rich in resources, and was the richest place on the Norland continent. Looking down at the wilderness from high up in the sky, one could see the huge magic beasts hunting for food in the wilderness. One could also see groups of mercenaries hunting the magic beasts, as well as mercenaries being hunted by the magic beasts. Scenes like this kept happening in the wastelands. The roles of hunter and prey could be reversed at any time, but adventurers and mercenaries were still happy to dive into the wastelands and reap great rewards from the extreme danger. The deeper they went into the wilderness, the fewer mercenaries there were, and the more powerful auras there were. Meg could sense the auras of a few 9th-tier magic beasts. There was even a 10th-tier magic beast's aura. When RZ flew past, it let out a violent roar with a strong sense of territory. "Wow, So there are so many magic beasts in the wilderness. They look like little ants. Amy lay on the griffin's back and looked down curiously. Then, she patted the griffin's back gently, and egged it on. Little RZ, let's fly closer and see what they look like. RZ saw that Meg didn't object, so it dove down and flew close to the dense forest. It spun through the narrow canyon, flew over the heads of the 9th-tier magic beasts, and sped through the forest with a 10th-tier giant python on its back. Amy cheered. It's a good helper to take care of children. Meg shook his head with a smile as he looked at the giant python that had finally given up its pursuit and smashed half a mountain with its tail. They teased all kinds of magic beasts along the way and passed through all kinds of dangerous places. It was a high-energy journey, but they didn't feel bored at all. Of course, this was also because of RZ's 10th-tier power and unparalleled speed. Otherwise, even a 10th-tier powerhouse would be severely injured if they didn't die. After about 2 hours, the land turned into a blue sea. Wow, so much water. Father, is that the sea that you were talking about? It's blue, it's so beautiful. Amy's eyes lit up, and she said with joy. Yes, this is the sea. Meg nodded. The boundless sea opened up one's mind. Then, are there mermaids in this sea too? Will we be able to meet them? Amy asked curiously. Maybe, but it's not that easy to meet mermaids, Meg said with a smile. Then I'll call them. Amy made a trumpet with her 2 little hands and shouted toward the sea, Mermaids, I'm Amy. Hello. Plop. A dolphin jumped out of the water, and then a group of dolphins also jumped out of the water, as if in response to Amy's words. Wow, wow, so cute. The smile on Amy's face became even brighter. Meg sat at the side and watched with a smile. With Amy by his side, this leisurely trip was really too comfortable. Father, look, those rocks are floating in the air, Amy said as she pointed to the sky in the distance. Meg looked up and saw a black spot in the sky in the distance gradually becoming clearer. Several floating islands thousands of meters above the sea appeared in Meg's sight. Is that Dragon Island? Meg's eyes gradually widened. Even though he had already seen many incredible things after coming to the alternate world, Meg was still astounded when he saw those huge islands that were half hidden in the fog floating in midair. Can we go up and take a look? Amy turned to Meg with anticipation. Roar. A dragon's roar sounded, and a huge dragon with a wingspan of over 100 meters flew over and disappeared among those islands. Of course. This is the destination of our trip. Meg nodded with a smile, and then patted the griffin's back gently. RZ, keep a low profile. It's best not to be discovered by the giant dragons. Let's go to Red Dragon Island. Howl, RZ let out a soft roar, and with a flap of its wings, it flew toward Dragon Island. It avoided the small sharp rocks below and plunged into the fog. Huge floating islands, giant dragons could be seen everywhere, and the dragon's roar could be heard from afar. The pressure of powerhouses was everywhere. This was Dragon Island, the gathering place of the strongest race on the Norland continent. RZ glided past the periphery. Not far away, a red island with smoke coming out of it appeared in Meg's sight. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 965. Red Dragon Johnson and his family have committed the crime of causing trouble and endangering public safety. The evidence is conclusive, and the punishment for both crimes is as follows: imprisonment in the Bastille prison for 3 years. After the imprisonment, they will not be allowed to enter Chaos City for 3 years. In the Grey Temple, the judge announced the punishment in front of everyone. We don't belong to Chaos City. You have no right to punish us. I want to see your city lord. Have you thought about the consequences of doing this? The Red Dragons will not accept such a punishment so easily. Johnson shouted agitatedly, and the metal chains on his body clanged loudly. Chown and his mother also looked a little flustered. The trauma of almost dying yesterday was still fresh in their minds, and now they were going to be imprisoned for 3 years in humiliation. For such a thing to happen to the noble giant dragons was as uncomfortable as being killed. Chaos City's laws are set up to protect the safety of Chaos City's residents. As long as you step into Chaos City, regardless of race or identity, you have to abide by it. If the Red Dragons have any dissatisfaction, you can raise it to Chaos City. However, this will not affect the verdict at all. Your protest is invalid, the judge said calmly as he glanced at Johnson before turning to leave. The Grey Temple's knights went forward and escorted the 3 red dragons away to the Bastille prison. They would be spending 3 years there. Since it was a reformation, they would not die, but they would definitely lose a layer of skin. I was wrong. I shouldn't have eaten a free meal. I will never eat a free meal in my life. Boo-hoo. Chown finally broke down as he cried and wailed. How dare you eat a free meal from Mammoth? You must be tired of living, one of the knights in charge of escorting them mumbled. Inform the red dragons that they don't have to waste their time. Not a day less than 3 years. Also, tell them that they are already lucky to be able to escape from the hands of the Lord of Ice and the Lord of Fire. If they don't want to be wiped out, they should not provoke Mammoth anymore. It's too troublesome to collect their corpses, Brandley instructed a staff member outside the court. Yes, that staff member answered, and left quickly. Chown. Look at me. As a real red dragon, I will never lose my dignity and ideals because of this. However, 3 years is just a nap for us dragons. You should remember this humiliation. When you are strong enough in the future, you can return this humiliation in double, Johnson yelled at Chown, who was lying limp in the corner with a dejected expression. But father, the chest of treasures you gave me is all gone, Chown said softly, still a little depressed. Fool, that's just a small chest of treasures. In the long lifespan of a dragon, you can collect much more treasures than this. When we return to Red Dragon Island this time, father will give you a chest of treasures with more treasures than before. The mother dragon stroked Chown's head with a smile. Yes. Yes. Xiao Sen forced a smile. Great. Then I'll have my treasures again. Chown's eyes were filled with surprise. Fire Dragon Island was located at the edge of the Dragon Island archipelago. The Fire Dragon tribe was not considered a strong tribe among the dragon tribes, so they could only live at the edge of the Dragon Island for many years. However, even the Red Dragon tribe, which was ranked at the bottom of the dragon tribes, still had 10th tier dragons in their tribe. This also proved the strength of the entire dragon tribe. They had the largest number of high-end combat forces. A towering active volcano stood in the center of Fire Dragon Island. Boiling lava gushed out from the crater from time to time. The entire Red Dragon Island looked a little gray because of the volcanic ash. The visibility was extremely low, and the air was filled with the smell of sulfur and ashes. The purple-striped griffin quietly landed on the northwest side of the active volcano. The purple-striped griffin concealed its aura along the way, so it wasn't discovered by any giant dragons. Its powerful divine sense also allowed it to avoid all the possible enemies that it might encounter. Just like that, it arrived at its destination without any mishaps. Meg bought 2 dust masks from the system and put them on. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. This kind of environment was not suitable for humans at all. Father, where are the pigs that we are looking for? Amy jumped down from the griffin's back and looked around curiously. They should be around here. Meg also looked around. The fiery pig was born on Red Dragon Island. It liked the heat and fed on volcanic ash. It was the favorite food of the red dragon. It was half wild and half domesticated, so there should be a lot of them. Roar. Right at this moment, 2 dragon roars came from the side. Mag hid behind a huge rock with Amy in his arms, and Azzy followed suit. They retracted their wings so that they didn't look too conspicuous. 2 little red dragons flew down from the volcano and flew over Meg and the others' heads. Then, they swooped down. Soon, there was a commotion below. The ground shook slightly as if a group of large animals were being chased away. Even the ground was trembling slightly. 2 stinky dragons. Father, are we going to take care of these stinky dragons on the way today? Amy's eyes lit up as she asked eagerly. No, we're not here to fight today. Meg shook his head and said with a smile, besides, although they look very similar, these 2 little red dragons didn't do anything bad. So, we can't beat them up casually. That would be no different from the stinky dragons. Is that so? Amy understands. Amy nodded thoughtfully. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. She pointed ahead and said, Father, look. Is that the pig that they're holding in their hands, the pig we're looking for? Meg followed Amy's finger and looked. His eyes also lit up. The flaming pig that was being held in the claws of the two red dragons was their target, the fiery pig. So it's down there. Meg was deep in thought. He started walking down the volcano with Amy. The scorching heat hit them in the face. Fortunately, Amy cast a freezing spell in time to offset the heat. Otherwise, it would have been a little unbearable. After walking down for a while, Meg suddenly stopped. He pointed at a fiery pig that was stirring up volcanic ash and whispered, "Sure, look what we found. There's a lone fiery pig over there. Its meat is exceptionally plump, but fiery pigs aren't easy to deal with. Let's quietly approach it from behind. Don't make any noise." Meg and Amy quietly approached the fiery pig. Before Meg could make a move, Amy had already hit the fiery pig's head with her club. It didn't struggle at all. It died peacefully. "Yes, that's it. Hit it from the back, and then drag it away." Mag nodded with a complicated expression as he dragged the dead pig up the mountain. Chapter 966. The mission was completed without any surprises or danger. Meg didn't even have time to feel the fiery boar's headache-inducing flames. "Father, are we going to roast or boil this boar?" Amy asked expectantly as she looked at the fiery boar in Meg's hand. "This boar is mainly used to make red braised pork. It's a cooking method different from roasting and boiling. I'll make it for Amy when we get back to the restaurant," Meg replied with a smile. This fiery boar was about 150 kilograms. Its fur was blood red, and it had a pair of sharp white fangs. Its fur was longer than that of a wild boar, and its body was also more slender. Speaking of being particular, the system was indeed particular. To make a dish of red braised pork, the main ingredient was a level 4 magical beast, and it was only produced on the Red Dragon Island. If the Red Dragon Island's fiery pig was eaten up, the red dragons would cry to death. Of course, Meg, who didn't have a good impression of Red Dragon Island, naturally wouldn't feel guilty about this. Meg carried the fiery boar and climbed back to the mountainside with Amy. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly heard a conversation coming from the other side of the mountain. Meg and Amy walked over stealthily, sticking close to the rocks. They poked their heads out to take a look. It turned out that the two little red dragons who caught the fiery boar earlier were talking as they ate it. "Have you heard? Chown, that fool, brought his father and mother to Chaos City to smash someone's restaurant yesterday. In the end, they lost and were arrested. I don't know when they will be released. Ha ha ha. Chown, that fool. It's not surprising that something like this happened to him. However, Lord Johnson is an 8th-tier giant dragon. He couldn't even smash a restaurant. He was even caught. Isn't that too embarrassing?" The two little red dragons laughed, gloating over Johnson's misfortune. "Seems like they're talking about the family of 3 from yesterday." Meg was deep in thought. The news came rather quickly. Just as Meg was about to leave with Amy, a little red dragon suddenly said, "Say, if they don't come back, do you think their cave on the 5th peak will be occupied by other giant dragons? That's a super big cave." "I don't think so. Sir Chiao Sen must have accumulated a lot of treasures. If they are taken by other people, he will not let it go when he returns," another little red dragon said. Meg's lips curled into a smile as he picked up Amy and walked towards RZ. "Father, are we going back now?" Amy asked. "No, we still have to go to a place on the way to earn some living expenses." Meg smiled and shook his head. He stuck close to the fiery boar and carried Amy onto the griffin's back. He whispered, "RZ, let's go to the cave in the middle of the 5th mountain." RZ flapped its wings and swooped down. Like a sharp arrow, it pierced into the hole in the center of the 5th mountain peak. Pop! A soft pop came from the hole, but it did not affect RZ in the slightest. The tunnel inside the cave was very wide. Even RZ, with its wingspan of over 100 meters, could easily pass through it. The stone walls were inlaid with luminous pearls, illuminating the passage. At the end of the passage, there was a magnificent hall. Precious gems were casually placed, reflecting dazzling light, dazzling the eyes of those who looked at them. "Wow! There are so many gems." Amy looked around, her eyes sparkling. System, I want to deposit something. Meg's lips slowly curled up. After taking these gems, there was no need for this trip. Host, your actions are immoral. As a righteous system, I cannot associate myself with you and do such a thing that goes against morality and the law, the system said sternly. Tell me, how much do you want for 1 cubic meter of storage? Anything higher than 500 copper coins is off the table. Meg picked up a sapphire and looked at it before curling his lips. 499 copper coins, the system said a little weakly. Deal. Meg put down the sapphire casually and nodded. There were more gems in this haul than in the chest that Amy had seized the day before, but the 2 8th-tier dragons collection should not be limited to just this. Meg walked around the hall, then pushed away a huge golden chair placed high up, and a hidden tunnel appeared. Meg walked into the tunnel with Amy. After violently tearing down a metal door, a large treasure vault was revealed. Golden gems were piled up into a small mountain, and Meg was a little dazzled. System, take it all. Don't even leave a single luminous pearl for illumination. I'll give you an extra 1,000 copper coins for the removal fee. Meg nodded in satisfaction, then turned and left with Amy in his arms. Host, you're a little too much. The system said quietly. Too much. You have to pay for what you're doing. I'll just take it that I'm collecting money for the bosses that they ate and dashed in the past. Meg looked calm. The purple-striped griffin flew out of the cave. Only holes were left in the magnificent cave abode, and not even a single luminous pearl was left. Even the huge golden dragon chair was taken away. I received my first treasure from your grandfather when I came of age. In the hundreds of years that followed, my treasure kept increasing. This kind of joy is indescribable. Treasure is my life, and they have become an indispensable part of my life. On Red Dragon Island, my treasure can be ranked in the top 10. This has given me a high status in the tribe, Jawson said proudly. Johnson looked at John proudly. John, you will be the inheritor of my wealth in the future. Father, I'll work hard. Jawson's eyes gradually lit up, and he nodded vigorously. Frost colossal dragons surrounded the Frost battlefield in the center of Frost Dragon Island. Today, in this Frost battlefield, Elizabeth and Fox would decide the new chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. This was a very important matter to the Frost Dragon tribe, so all the members of the tribe came here. The chief's position had been vacant for 3 years, so it was expected that a new chief would be chosen. However, this duel was also quite controversial among the Frost Dragon tribe. Although Elizabeth was the most powerful one among the younger generation, she was still 2 levels lower than Fox. A 7th tier versus an 8th tier was not a fair duel. Silence. Douglas appeared on the platform, and his voice reverberated throughout the entire Frost Dragon Island. He looked at the dragons, and said in a deep voice, "Today, Elizabeth challenged Fox to a duel to decide the new chief of the Frost Dragon tribe, and Fox accepted the challenge. After the elders voted, they agreed to this duel. The winner of this duel will become the new chief. Come on, Elizabeth, Fox." A frost dragon with a wingspan of 100 meters swooped down toward the center of the Frost battlefield. Fox was already standing in the center of the battlefield when he retracted his wings. Tens of meters away, a snowflake-like pattern lit up, and Elizabeth walked out of thin air. She looked at Fox coldly. Elizabeth has advanced to 8th tier. Right at this moment, an elder exclaimed in surprise. Chapter 967. 8th tier. All the frost dragons on the Frost battlefield were shocked as they looked at Elizabeth, who was standing in the middle of the battlefield, in disbelief. It had been less than a year since she broke through to the 7th tier, and Elizabeth actually broke through again and successfully advanced to the 8th tier. This speed of advancement was really too shocking. Although the Frost Dragon tribe was one of the top 10 dragon tribes, and had 10 10th tier elders, a 8th tier giant dragon could still be called the top expert in the tribe. Among the Frost dragons who were under 200 years old, there was not a single one who had successfully advanced to the 8th tier. And now, Elizabeth was only 19 years old, but she had already successfully advanced to the 8th tier, displaying shocking and terrifying talent. It was hard not to think of the legend who had once turned the Frost Dragon tribe upside down, Rankster. And Elizabeth was his daughter. A 19-year-old 8th-tier giant dragon. It was hard to imagine what heights she would grow to in the future. Would she be on par with her father? Or would she surpass her father? There was a commotion in the frost battlefield. How is this possible? The second elder cried out in surprise. Elizabeth had actually broken through to the 8th level in a single night. This was simply too inconceivable. All the elders could not hide their shock as well. The appearance of such a prodigy was naturally a good thing for the Frost Dragon tribe. However, Elizabeth was about to have a life-and-death duel with Fox now. The arrow was already on the bow, and it had to be released. No one knew what the outcome would be. Is it the Frost Dragon sauce? Rankster indeed left something behind for Elizabeth. It's just that this lass is too impatient. If she had waited another 10 years and advanced to the 9th tier before challenging Fox, the outcome would be uncertain then. Douglas looked at Elizabeth with pity in his eyes. Elizabeth, your talent really surprises me. It even reminds me of your father. Fox looked at Elizabeth, and the shock in his eyes was quickly replaced by mockery. However, it's a pity that 8th tier is 8th tier. You may never understand the difference between 9th tier and 8th tier. If I live to be 500 years old, I won't just be a 9th tier, Elizabeth said calmly to Fox. There was not a hint of panic in her voice. Very well. I hope you won't regret the decision you made today. You won't have the chance to live past today, Fox said coldly. He raised his hand, and the space around Elizabeth was instantly surrounded by ice and snow. It was like a cage that was rapidly shrinking towards Elizabeth. Elizabeth's glabella lit up, and her expression turned solemn. She swiped her left hand at the ice wall in front of her. Like a sharp knife cutting through the ice wall, a crack appeared on the seemingly indestructible ice wall, and Elizabeth walked out of the crack. It seems that I have underestimated you. Fox withdrew his right hand and spread out his arms, instantly transforming into a frost dragon that was 100 meters long. He flapped his wings and soared into the air, opening his mouth to spit out countless icicles at Elizabeth. A snowflake array appeared under Elizabeth's feet, and she disappeared the moment the icicles hit the ground. She then reappeared in the sky hundreds of meters away, turning into a slimmer frost dragon with a wingspan of nearly 90 meters. With a flap of her wings, wind blades mixed with hail swept toward Fox. You're courting death. Fox roared and did not dodge. He rushed straight toward the wind blades and hail, and a layer of ice crystal armor appeared on his body. Ding ding ding. With a series of clinking sounds, a layer of Fox's ice crystal armor was shaved off. He rushed over without suffering any substantial damage, and arrived in front of Elizabeth in the blink of an eye. His sharp dragon claws were suffused with a cold silver light, and they were like sharp swords that grabbed at Elizabeth. Elizabeth turned around gracefully, trying to avoid them. However, Fox's speed was obviously faster. The sharp claws left 3 bloody marks on her back, and Elizabeth's body fell straight down. Whoosh! Cries of surprise rang out in the frost battlefield. Was this duel going to end so soon? However, just as Elizabeth was about to land on the ground, she spread her wings again and completed a somersault close to the ground. The chanting sound echoed throughout the frost battlefield. The falling snowflakes suddenly stopped, and time seemed to have stopped. Even the expressions on everyone's faces froze for a moment. Then, icicles appeared above Fox's head and fell like a storm of pear blossoms. Fart! The sharp icicles pierced through the thick ice armor and into his flesh, and blood instantly splattered everywhere. Fox, who was full of pride, showed a painful expression. His body swayed, and he hurriedly dodged the icicles. He flipped over and shook off the icicles that were nailed to his body, and he looked at Elizabeth with resentment. Great! The dragons cheered. Elizabeth's desperate counterattack was amazing. In a situation where the difference in strength was obvious, it was already very impressive that her attack was effective. The first exchange of blows had already spilled blood on the frost battlefield. This duel was destined to be exciting. And this exchange of blows also seemed to be the prelude to the duel. Elizabeth and Fox began to attack each other crazily. Icicles and ice blades flew all over the sky. It was an absolutely violent collision, and hot blood was spilled all over the frost battlefield. The frost dragons were completely ignited, and their cheers rang throughout the Dragon Island. What's so lively about? After taking away all of Johnson's family's treasures, Meg, who was about to return with a full load, looked in the direction of Frost Dragon Island with some surprise. Father, let's go and take a look. Amy was also full of curiosity. She loved to watch a good show. Meg thought for a while, and nodded. Okay. RZ, try to fly higher. There's no need to enter the airspace of Frost Dragon Island directly. Meg said to RZ, and then said in his mind, System, give me 2 high-powered binoculars. The farther, the better. The purple-striped griffin flew higher and higher into the sky. It was so high that it was difficult to see this black dot from the Dragon Island. Normal dragons wouldn't fly to this height either. Okay, just stay here and don't move. Meg took out a small binoculars and handed it to Amy. Amy turned it over and put it in front of her. She looked at Meg and exclaimed, Father, how did you become so small? Amy took it upside down. Mag smiled as he helped Amy rewind the binoculars. He pointed downwards, and took one for himself to look down. Wow, 2 white dragons are fighting. However, why did that white dragon look so familiar? It looks like Big Sister Elizabeth. Amy learned how to use the binoculars and looked down. Soon, she exclaimed. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 968. It's not like, it's her. Meg looked at the center of Frost Dragon Island where the 2 Ice Blast WMS were fighting. Among them, the slender one had a crystal snowflake on its head, which was something that the other Ice Blast WMS did not have. They're all the same. Why are they fighting? Amy asked, puzzled. Maybe it's because of some duel. Meg looked at the Ice Blast WMS around him. It was obviously an open duel. However, he could not guess the exact reason. The battle was very tragic. The 2 Ice Blast WMS were covered in wounds, and blood dyed the white frost battlefield red. Both sides were seriously injured. However, the battle seemed to be coming to an end. Elizabeth's opponent was obviously stronger than her. He slapped her down from the sky with his tail, and she crashed into the ice. Although Elizabeth spat out an icicle before landing, and it also pierced the wings of the Ice Blast WM, Elizabeth, who was lying on the ground and unable to move, was obviously more seriously injured. With a flash of light, she transformed into her human form and struggled to stand up. The cheers in the frost battlefield had already stopped. The Ice Blast WMS were looking at Elizabeth, who was lying in a pool of blood and trying to stand up, with respect in their eyes. It was not a fair duel. Elizabeth, who had just broken through to level 8, was fighting against Fox, who had perfected level 9, as if they were evenly matched. If they had not seen the battle today, no one would have believed that a battle between a level 8 and a level 9 would be like that. However, although Elizabeth had shown amazing strength and tenacity, the difference in strength still determined the outcome of the battle. Fox used his claws to pull out the huge icicle that had pierced into his wings, and threw it aside. He looked at Elizabeth, who was lying in a pool of blood below, and sneered. You can't defeat me. I'm the chief of the Ice Blast WM tribe. Now, I'm going to take back what your father took away back then. Elizabeth forced herself to sit up. She looked up at Fox and sneered. Back then, you were not fit to be the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. Now, you are still not fit, just like how you would never dare to challenge the Great Elder. Back then, my father dared to do so. In the future, I will also dare to do so. But you will never dare to. Shut up. Right now, I'm going to kill you. Fox roared hysterically. He opened his mouth and a ball of sparkling light began to condense in his mouth. Many of the onlooking frost dragons turned their heads to the side, not wanting to see this scene. This was a battle of life and death agreed upon by both sides. Even the Great Elder had no right to interfere. The 5th Elder stood up and agitatedly said to Douglas, Great Elder, Elizabeth could be the pillar of our Frost Dragon tribe in the next 1,000 years. We can't just watch her die like this. There's no one else in the younger generation who can stand shoulder to shoulder with her. Great Elder, are you going to watch the hope of our Frost Dragon tribe be destroyed just like that? The seventh elder also looked at Douglas with a pained expression. Elders, don't forget that this is a battle of life and death that Elizabeth proposed. Forcefully interfering now is going against the rules of the Frost Dragon tribe, the second elder said coldly to the two elders. Douglas looked at Elizabeth with a frown, but he did not say anything. Father, let's help Sister Elizabeth. She looks so pitiful. She's our guest, Amy pleaded as she tugged at Meg's clothes. Meg, who had planned to pass by after watching the show, hesitated for a while when he heard Amy's words. However, he still nodded. Let's have a celestial pig descend from the sky then. Meg looked down with the binoculars, and then threw the fiery pig that was hanging on the griffin's tail down. Amy, hide behind my cloak and hug me tightly. No matter what happens, don't poke your head out, and don't let go. Meg sat down, and grabbed a scale on Ozzy's neck. Okay, Amy answered. She lifted Meg's cloak and went in. Then, she hugged Meg tightly from behind. Ozzy, dive down. We'll retreat after we save her. Meg patted the purple-striped griffin lightly. Awoo! Ozzy raised its head and roared. Its head plunged down, and it made a sonic boom as it pierced straight down toward Frost Dragon Island. Elizabeth was killed, and Fox became the new chief. It seemed to have become an unchangeable fact and result. Although the Frost Dragon tribe revered the strong, they still felt sorry for Elizabeth. As the only daughter of Rankster, her strength and tenacity were awe-inspiring. However, a rule that even the Great Elder could not break, so who could save her? Elizabeth knelt in the pool of blood, and looked at Fox, who was accumulating power to release the last attack. What appeared in her mind was not her father whom she had been looking for, but Yarbemia. That idiot, I didn't tell her clearly. I don't know if she'll keep the ring and not open it. Probably, she's so stupid. But, this seems pretty good, at least she can live comfortably. Elizabeth thought to herself. Go to hell. From today onwards, I'm the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. No one can stop me anymore. Fox looked at Elizabeth with madness in his eyes. The light in his mouth was already very dazzling, and no one would stop him. He could enjoy this moment to his heart's content. Wow! Look, what's falling from the sky? A little dragon among the dragons exclaimed in surprise. Many giant dragons raised their heads and saw a fiery red object descending from the sky. All of them were astonished to see it. It's heading towards Fox. What a terrifying speed! Soon, another giant dragon exclaimed. That thing was like a meteorite from outer space, falling at a terrifying speed towards Fox, who was hovering in midair. What? Fox also felt something falling from above, but before he could turn his head, that thing had already landed on his back. Crack! The sound of bones cracking could be heard clearly. The frost dragon with a wingspan of more than 100 meters was smashed into the ground by a giant hammer from the sky. Boom! The ground shook, and ice shards flew everywhere. If I'm not wrong, that seems to be a flying, fiery pig. A frost dragon swallowed his saliva and said in disbelief. The entire frost battlefield fell into an eerie silence. Bang! A sound broke the silence. A black dot appeared in the vision of all the dragons. In the blink of an eye, it was already above their heads, and a purple-striped griffin appeared in everyone's sight. That! All the frost dragons widened their eyes as they looked at that purple-striped griffin in disbelief. Purple-striped griffin! The 10 great elders also stood up abruptly, their faces full of vigilance. I'm going to save this dragon. A deep voice rang out. Chapter 969. That voice wasn't loud, but it traveled clearly into the ears of every frost dragon. It was deafening. Fox, who was still high and mighty and prepared to deal the final blow to Elizabeth, was now smashed into the ice pit, and couldn't move. That wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. A declaration that Elizabeth's life belonged to him. Alex. A legendary name appeared in their minds, and the eyes of all the dragons widened. Apart from shock, they were also in disbelief. Alex, whose name shook the Norland continent because of his dragon-slaying, was seen as the most dangerous knight by the giant dragons. None of the giant dragons that died under his sword were nameless. Although most of them were the scum of Dragon Island, The ones who could do evil were all dragons with outstanding strength. However, none of the dragons could escape Alex's punishment. Even the giant dragons who thought highly of themselves had to admit that man's power. And to the frost dragons, this kind of power was even more direct. Because just 5 years ago, Alex had defeated the most powerful member of the frost dragon tribe, Rankster, on this frost battlefield. All the giant dragons of the frost dragon tribe were present in that battle. They saw their king being defeated with their own eyes. That kind of power was enough to make all the giant dragons feel helpless. At that time, that man was riding on this purple-striped griffin. And now, he was back. Howl. A unique and loud howl accompanied by an ear-piercing sonic boom sounded. The purple-striped griffin appeared on the frost battlefield in a flash. It spread its wings, and flew close to the inner circle of the frost battlefield. The strong wind that it created made all the frost dragons retreat pathetically. Finally, it landed lightly beside Elizabeth. The purple-striped griffin was glowing with a purple-gold luster, and it was dazzling under the sunlight. Its domineering and awe-inspiring posture made the WMS feel slightly shocked. It was just a mount, yet it had such a powerful aura. And on the griffin's back sat a straight figure. That legendary long sword was beside him. Although he was wearing a mask, all the giant dragons present were sure that he was Alex. The frost battlefield was silent. The frost dragons looked at Alex uneasily. He had appeared on Frost Dragon Island again after 3 years. Why was he here? Fox, who had just defeated Elizabeth to become the new chief, was smashed to death by a fiery pig. Without Rankster, who could stop him? Alex. Elizabeth also stared at the figure sitting on the purple-striped griffin in disbelief. She had thought that she was going to die at Fox's hands, but who would have thought that she would be saved by Alex, whom she had always regarded as her nemesis? This feeling made her feel a little dazed for a moment. Her father's depression disappeared, and her mother died of depression. In her heart, the culprit had always been Alex. In her heart, the biggest motivation for her cultivation was to be able to defeat Alex one day. 3 years ago, Alex's sudden death had a huge impact on her. She had even lost the goal to work hard for. However, Alex's reappearance some time ago had reignited her passion and flame for cultivation. But now, she had yet to reach the level where she could challenge him, and he was going to save her. Elizabeth looked at that figure with complicated feelings. She really didn't want to die. She still had many things to do, and the most important one was to defeat this man in front of her. Seems a little too high profile. Meg thought to himself embarrassedly as he felt the tense atmosphere around him. Then, he looked at Fox, who had fainted after being smashed into a bloody mess by the fiery pig, and decided to say something to ease the atmosphere. "This is your new chief. Seems a little terrible." The frost battlefield was still silent. The frost dragons glared with anger burning in their eyes, but they didn't dare to say anything. However, the chief of the frost dragons was knocked unconscious by a fiery pig that fell from the sky. If news of this got out, they would probably become the laughingstock of Dragon Island, right? Douglas took a step forward and looked at Meg with a frown. In a deep voice, he shouted, "Alex, you came uninvited and ruined the showdown between the chiefs of the frost dragons. Are you declaring war on the frost dragons? She's the daughter of an old friend. Since I've seen her, I naturally can't leave her be. Since all of you want to see her die, then I'll take her away." Meg looked up at Douglas before sweeping his gaze across the 10 elders on the platform. He calmly said, "Who dares to stop me?" The expressions of the frost dragon elders changed drastically, and their faces flushed red. However, none of them dared to step forward when they saw Meg sitting upright on the purple-striped griffin's back. Douglas's brows were tightly knitted, but he didn't say anything. "Azi." Meg patted the purple-striped griffin gently. The purple-striped griffin's wings wrapped around Elizabeth gently before throwing her back. Meg then carried Elizabeth in his arms. "Let's go," Meg said calmly. "Howl." The purple-striped griffin issued a loud and clear cry. It flapped its wings, and flew towards the high platform where the 10 elders were seated. It issued a sonic boom, and became a small black dot in the sky in the blink of an eye. "He's too arrogant. Great Elder, are we going to let him go just like that?" Where's the dignity of the frost dragons? The second elder said to Douglas furiously. Douglas glanced at the second elder, and calmly said, if you're indignant, you can chase after him and fight him. I. The second elder's face turned red, but he was suddenly at a loss for words. He didn't dare to agree. Since when did the dragon race have any dignity in front of Alex and Irina? Even if news of this spread, it would just be a show of appreciation, Douglas said with a complicated expression as he glanced at the black dot that had already disappeared into the sky. The other dragons were also furious when they heard that. Since when did a dragon have to be bullied by a human knight and an elf? This was really too bullying. Douglas retracted his gaze and looked at Fox, whose back was badly mutilated. He frowned and said, take Fox away to treat his injuries. The winner of this duel has not been decided yet. The position of the chief will continue to be vacant. Great Elder, if not for Alex's sudden interference, the winner of this duel would have been Fox. This was witnessed by all of us. Your way of handling it is not in accordance with the rules. Fox is already the new chief of the Frost Dragon race, the second elder said anxiously. I agree with the second elder. I agree too. Soon, another 4 to 5 elders came forward one after another and agreed. As the chief of the Frost Dragon race, apart from having outstanding abilities, one must also have the heart of the entire race, and not be someone who only cares about personal gains and losses. Back then, I had countless chances to kill Rankster, but I never really thought of killing him. That's why the Frost Dragon race became one of the top 10 dragon races again because of him. Douglas looked at the elders, and coldly said, and today, he only wants to kill Elizabeth. Chapter 970. The purple-striped griffin flew at supersonic speed, and left the Dragon Island far behind in the blink of an eye. Meg carried Elizabeth in his arms, and felt the softness squeezing against his chest. While he was silently complaining about how perfect this ice beauty's development was, he was also silently restraining himself. It was not that he wanted to take advantage of her, but Elizabeth in his arms looked like she was going to let go at any time. Even if Meg wanted to put her down, he had to consider whether she would turn into a pile of flesh and blood like that fiery pig just now if she fell from a height of a few thousand meters. Elizabeth's mind was also blank at this moment. She, who had never been in contact with a man before, was actually in a man's arms now. Furthermore, this fellow was the enemy she had been trying to defeat for the past few years. However, the battle just now had depleted her energy, and the injuries she had sustained made her lose control of her body. Even moving a finger was an extravagant wish. She could feel the strength of the pair of arms hugging her, and the places that were touched felt as if they were burning. The sense of shame was simply too strong. She, who could not struggle, even wanted to just let herself pass out. Wait a minute. Don't pass out first. Do you have a place you can go to? Or rather, where should I send you? Meg asked Elizabeth, who was blushing and closing her eyes. Although he had saved Elizabeth, Meg could not bring her back to Amy's directly. That would be equivalent to announcing to the world that he was Alex, and that he owned a Amy's in Chaos City. However, Elizabeth's injuries were too severe, and it was obviously not possible for her to recover by herself. Someone had to take care of her and give her timely treatment. Otherwise, even if she did not die, she would need a very long time to recover. Where should I go? Elizabeth opened her eyes again, and looked at the blue sky. She did not seem to have any friends since she was young. Apart from Frost Dragon Island, there was nowhere else she could go. The continent is so big, but there's no place I can go. A hint of self-mockery and loneliness flashed across Elizabeth's eyes. Suddenly, a figure squeezed into her mind. In Chaos City, there's an ice cream shop. After Elizabeth said this, her head tilted to the side and she completely fainted. There's an ice cream shop. Isn't this my ice cream shop? Meg stared at the unconscious Elizabeth with a melancholy expression. Hey, young lady, you can't be so irresponsible. How am I supposed to take the blame when you throw it to me? What's going on? Meg was completely dumbfounded. Originally, saving Elizabeth was just a matter of convenience. He did not expect that it would become a burden that he could not get rid of. Now that the dragon had been saved, how to deal with it had become the biggest problem. Sister Elizabeth, Are you going to the ice cream shop? Will she get better after eating ice cream? Amy squirmed out from behind Meg's cloak and looked at Elizabeth in Meg's arms curiously. If she didn't want to eat ice cream before she left, she might have thought so. Meg shrugged as he looked at Elizabeth in his arms, melancholy at how to deal with her. He naturally could not do something like throwing her down from the sky. After all, Amy was still watching from the side. However, it was not realistic to bring her home directly. There was no difference between bringing her to the ice cream shop and bringing her home. It was so frustrating. If father brings big sister Elizabeth home, then she can only sleep on the big bed with him. Big sister Irina should mind, right? Should I tell her? Amy mumbled at the side, a little distressed. However, Meg was quick-witted and almost fell off the griffin's back. He turned to look at Amy. When did his adorable daughter become a little spy? Moreover, she could write her own script and add in the plot. No, no. Father will not bring any woman home for the night. Meg made his stance clear. Then does big sister Shirley not count? Amy blinked and asked. Meg, he won't bring anyone home for the night. Meg said helplessly. The little girl was becoming more and more difficult to deal with. Sometimes, she even made him feel like he was caught off guard. However, Amy's words gave Meg a new idea. It was obviously impossible to send Elizabeth to the ice cream shop directly. However, MIA and the others were currently living in the ice cream shop. If he left Elizabeth in the care of Yarbemia, with her kind nature, she would definitely not stand by and do nothing. Meg had always been at ease with MIA doing things. System, I need some medical equipment to stop bleeding and suture wounds. The kind that is foolproof. Her injuries are too serious. If we don't stop the bleeding in time, I'm afraid she won't be able to make it to the city at night, Meg said in his mind. He looked around and then signaled for RZ to land on a rocky mountain. After laying Elizabeth flat on a flat rock, Meg took out the medical kit that the system had just received from behind the rock. He carefully read the manual that appeared in his mind, then took out a pair of scissors and prepared to cut Elizabeth's clothes open to treat her wounds. There were many wounds on her body. The most serious ones were the 2 wounds on her lower abdomen and back, and they were still bleeding. Mag was just about to do it when he saw Amy, who was standing at the side with a scrutinizing look. He hurriedly explained, Amy, Miss Elizabeth has suffered very serious injuries. If we don't treat her wounds now, she will die. So, I'm going to cut her clothes open to expose the wounds. After that, I'll treat and stop the bleeding. This is a pure process. Yes, I believe in father. Amy nodded her little head. Okay, then I'll start. Meg breathed a sigh of relief and used the scissors to cut open Elizabeth's clothes at her lower abdomen. Father cut open big sister Elizabeth's skirt and pulled it hard, Amy muttered. Meg's hand trembled, and the scissors almost flew out. It seemed that he had to find some time to persuade this little comrade of his. He had to convince her to defect to his side. After calming down, Meg looked at the bloody wound on Elizabeth's lower abdomen. It was probably caused by an icicle. Even with the dragon's powerful self-healing ability, the wound still couldn't heal. According to the manual given by the system, after disinfecting the wound, he used a stapler-like sewing machine to stitch up the wound. After applying a layer of the system's secret ointment and wrapping it with gauze, the wound stopped bleeding. After treating the wound in a hurry, Meg followed suit and treated the wound on her back in the same way. There was still some time before the sun went down. Meg, who had nothing to do, treated all the wounds on Elizabeth's body except for the critical parts. Father cut off big sister Elizabeth's skirt. Amy whispered. Chapter 971. Night fell, and after a busy day, Yarbemia made sure that the ice cream shop had been completely cleaned, turned off the lights, and locked the door. She and Barbara went to the back of the shop, and went up the stairs outside the wall. What's that? Barbara stopped in her tracks and grabbed onto Yarbemia. She looked at the black figure lying in front of the door with a wary expression. It looks like a person. Yarbemia was also slightly startled as he carefully examined the black figure. There's no movement. Seems like she's asleep. Or maybe she's unconscious. Barbara whispered after observing for a while. I'll go take a look. Yarbemia carefully walked over and turned on the light at the door. Yarbemia lowered his head to look at the figure lying in front of the door. After seeing the face, he immediately tensed up. Miss Elizabeth. The figure wrapped in a red cloak was none other than Elizabeth. Just like last time, her face was also very pale, and she seemed to have been severely injured. However, her entire body was wrapped in the red cloak, so it was impossible to see how serious her injuries were. MIA, is that the dragon from before? She seems to have been severely injured. Barbara looked at Elizabeth and whispered. Last time, MIA had brought a dragon back to the dormitory. Even though she didn't ask much about it, she still knew about it. Yes, Miss Elizabeth is my friend. Barbara, please open the door for me. I'm going to carry her in. Yarbemia nodded as he squatted down and gently picked up Elizabeth. Oh. Barbara turned around and took out the key to open the door. Thank you. Yarbemia carried Elizabeth into the room. It looks like she was sent here by someone. Why is it always here? Barbara stood at the door and looked around cautiously before closing the door with a puzzled expression. Father, Big Sister MIA and Big Sister Elizabeth are friends. In that case, we don't have to worry about her. Amy smiled as she stood on a tree not far away. Yeah, we don't have to worry anymore. Meg also smiled and nodded. Things went smoother than he had imagined. He had successfully thrown the blame on Elizabeth. But father cut Big Sister Elizabeth's dress like that. Won't Big Sister MIA think he's a pervert? Amy muttered curiously. That's pure treatment, pure. Meg sighed in his heart. He looked at Amy and said with a smile, Amy, are you hungry? What do you want to eat tonight? I want to eat braised pork. Amy's eyes lit up, but she soon said dejectedly, but we lost Piggy. We won't be able to eat Piggy tonight. It's okay. Father will make it for Xiaomi tomorrow. Let's eat roast duck tonight. The two of us can eat a whole roast duck, Meg said with a smile. Okay. Amy nodded her little head. The two of them jumped down from the tree and walked in the direction of Amy's. How did this happen? In the room, Yarbemia looked at Elizabeth, who had taken off her red cloak, and exclaimed in shock. Could it be that we met a pervert? The legendary sadist? Barbara was also shocked, and there was a hint of pity in her eyes. After taking off her red cloak, Elizabeth's blood-stained white dress was cut into pieces. There were countless cuts of various sizes, and her snow-white skin was exposed to the air. She looked extremely miserable, as if she had just been ravaged by a pervert. Yarbemia, who had a sad look on her face, suddenly noticed Elizabeth's wounds. Her eyes lit up, and she looked at Elizabeth again. She shook her head and said, No, there are wounds where the cuts were made. Moreover, the wounds have been treated. Although I don't know what medicine was used, and although there are many cuts, there are no signs of being violated. Perhaps someone saved Miss Elizabeth. That does seem to be the case. Barbara took a closer look and nodded in agreement. However, she added, but that person must be a pervert. How could a normal person cut dozens of holes in a girl's dress? I don't know what happened to Miss Elizabeth, but her injuries are too serious. We have to find someone to treat her as soon as possible. Yarbemia was a little anxious. I don't know any healing magic. Barbara shrugged, indicating that there was nothing she could do. Aisha is gone. MIA paced around the room anxiously. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. Oh right, there's still Big Sister 1111. Barbara, help me look after Miss Elizabeth. I'll be back soon, Yarbemia said, and quickly walked out the door. Barbara stood in the room and looked at Elizabeth, who was lying on the bed. She mumbled in confusion, why does a powerful frost dragon come to MIA time and time again after being severely injured? Big Sister 1111. Big Sister 1111. Yarbemia knocked on the door of the magic potion shop and called out. Soon, 1111 opened the door of the magic potion shop. She looked at the anxious MIA and asked concernedly, MIA, what's wrong? Lulu appeared behind 1111, and silently put a thick coat on her. Yarbemia did not have time to care about the dog food that was forced on her. She said anxiously, Big Sister 1111, can you please save a friend of mine? She's seriously injured. Of course. Where is she now? 1111 nodded without hesitation. Yarbemia's face lit up. She quickly said, "She's in my dorm. I'll take you there." "Okay, let's go." 1111 nodded. She walked out of the door and held Mia's cold hand. As they walked, she comforted her. "Don't worry. She'll be fine." Lulu followed them out silently. She closed the door gently and followed behind the two of them. "Just as I expected. Looks like I don't have to worry." Meg, who was standing at the door, turned around and walked into the restaurant. He was in a good mood. Amy sat on the high chair behind the counter. She looked at Ugly Duckling, who was sitting on the counter with an aggrieved expression, and consoled it. "Ugly Duckling, although we didn't bring you out this time, it's okay. Things like this will happen again in the future. You'll slowly get used to it." Meow tilde Ugly Duckling meowed pitifully. "Don't meow like a cat." Amy warned it seriously. "Meow, meow tilde Ugly Duckling meowed even more pitifully. "You have to remember that you're a duck. No matter how ugly you are, you can't give up on yourself. You have to know that even I haven't given up on you. What right do you have to give up on yourself?" Amy pinched Ugly Duckling's chubby cheeks. Then, she looked into its eyes with a serious expression, and said, "Now, learn to meow like a duck. Quack, quack, quack. Meow, meow, meow. Yes, quack, quack. Meow, meow, meow tilde." Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, the mobile version of this book, .com. Chapter 972. Thank you, Sister 1111, for making you come in such cold weather. Yarbemia walked 1111 to the door and said with gratitude and guilt, "It's a good thing to save someone's life. Also." 1111 put her hand in Lulu's big hand and said with a smile, "With Lulu here, it's not cold at all." "Hee hee." Lulu smiled honestly and put the coat on 1111 again. Yarbemia, who had a lot of words of gratitude to say, suddenly choked. There was only one word in her mind: goodbye. "All right, MIA, go back and take care of that lady. She's exhausted a lot of her physical and mental strength. Luckily, her wounds were treated in time, so her condition is not too bad. She should be able to move freely tomorrow after a good night's sleep. However, she needs to rest for at least a month if she wants to fully recover," 1111 said with a smile. "Okay." MIA watched as Lulu and 1111 walked away hand in hand, and then turned to enter the room. Elizabeth, who was lying on the bed, was still wearing the dress that had been cut into pieces. However, the horrible wounds on her body had all healed and turned into light red scars. Her pale face had regained its color. 1111's life magic had shown a miraculous healing effect. What happened after Miss Elizabeth left? How did she get so badly injured? Yarbemia looked at Elizabeth with a pained expression. "I have to help her change into a new set of clothes. If she wakes up and sees her clothes like this, she'll definitely be sad. Although I don't know who treated her wounds, just like Barbara said, the way they treated her was so perverted." Yarbemia thought to herself. She went to get a basin of water and wiped Elizabeth's body clean. Then, she found the pajamas that she had worn last time from the wardrobe and helped her change into them. Yarbemia, who had packed everything and changed into pajamas, stood by the bed. She looked at Elizabeth, who was sound asleep, and mumbled, "It should be fine if I sleep next to her, right?" At the same time, Meg, who had just coaxed Amy to sleep, was lying in bed and counting the day's gains. Ding! Congratulations to the host for completing the mission and successfully capturing a fiery pig. The reward is a red braised meat recipe. It's already in your account. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind, and a golden bag of experience appeared in Meg's mind. Meg was not in a hurry to open it. Instead, he asked with a smile, "System, how much are the treasures we've seized today worth?" The treasures seized by the host today, according to the recent market value, are approximately 1.53 billion copper coins, the system quickly replied. Interesting. The smile on Meg's face grew wider. Today's trip was not in vain. Not only did he get the red braised meat recipe, but he also got 1.5 billion for free. System, 1.5 billion here, plus the 300 million downstairs, makes a total of 1,845 billion copper coins. I'll buy 2 strength points from you to restore me to my peak condition. Is that okay? Meg asked in his mind, full of anticipation. Although 1.8 billion was not a small amount, if it could restore him to his peak condition, he would give it to the system without batting an eye. No. The system's answer was quick and decisive. Even 1.8 billion is not okay? System, aren't you a little too greedy? Meg frowned. Host, please take this system seriously. This system is a god of cookery cultivation system, not a pay-to-win system. Although it is an unchanging truth that pay-to-win can make one stronger, this system is also a system with moral integrity and a bottom line. Increasing the host's strength is to improve the host's culinary skills, and at the same time, to have the ability to protect himself in this alternate world. However, please understand your priorities. You came to this world to receive punishment and become the god of cookery under the supervision of this system. At the same time, you shoulder the great mission of using Earth's delicacies to conquer this world, not using force to conquer the world. The system's righteous voice sounded. So, you don't intend to sell it? Meg frowned. Sell? Of course, I'll sell it. The system quickly answered. It's just that the host's strength has exceeded the scope set by this system. In order to avoid being noticed by the heavenly axiom and being struck by lightning, this system must impose a necessary restriction on your strength increase. What do you mean? Meg's frown deepened. Within a month, the host can only purchase 0.5 strength points from this system. After a month, this system will evaluate and decide whether the host has the right to purchase any new strength points. At the same time, the system will no longer grant the right to purchase any strength points above level 8. The host must complete the designated mission to obtain them, the system answered. No room for discussion? No room for discussion. Meg sighed. The feeling of having money but not being able to spend it was indeed melancholic. What gave Meg a bigger headache was that the last 2 strength points couldn't be obtained in the form of purchase. Judging from the system's decisive tone, it should be non-negotiable. It was most likely a setting set by the heavenly axiom. This also cut off Meg's plan to purchase all the strength points at once after he sold the shares of the steam locomotive and obtained a huge amount of wealth. The most urgent thing to improve his strength was to return to the peak and go to the wind forest to rescue Irina. After that, he would kill all his enemies from the past. At the signing of the peace treaty in 3 months' time, if all the races couldn't reach an agreement, the Norland continent would very likely descend into chaos. Before that, he had to make himself strong enough to protect himself as soon as possible. He might not be able to save the world, but he would definitely protect Amy well. In this case, I'll use 300 million to buy a strength point. Meg thought to himself. The sooner he bought it, the sooner the 1-month waiting period would pass. He still understood this simple logic. Ding. 300 million worth of gems has been deducted. 0.5 strength point has been credited. Would the host like to undergo the 7 lightning strikes now? Wait. Meg jumped up from the bed immediately. As he walked to the balcony, he said, System, try to keep a low profile. Don't let anyone notice you. Don't worry, the system will strike lightning. There's no need to worry about safety. The system consoled. Crack. Boom. 7 bolts of lightning lit up the sky, waking many people up from their sweet dreams. System, what happened to the safety you said? Meg reached out to cover his private parts. He puffed out a puff of white smoke and rolled his eyes. His hair stood on end, emitting smoke. In terms of safety, the system has already perfectly protected the host, the system said with satisfaction. Hee hee, system, fuck your grandpa. Meg turned and ran downstairs. It was a disgrace to be naked. This is Mammis. I wonder if the person young Master Timothy wants to kill is here. At this moment, a man in black appeared below Mammis and whispered to himself. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 973. After going downstairs to take a shower, Meg, who had changed into a new set of clothes, walked to the window and lifted a corner of the curtain to look at the man in black outside the restaurant. He had already noticed this man's presence, but he didn't expect him to stay after taking a shower. Judging from his attire, he was obviously trying to tell others that he had ill intentions. He had replaced the word bad guy with a piece of black cloth, and hung it on his face. 7th tier human. Is the man from Rodu finally here? Mag pursed his lips upon hearing this. This was a little later than he had anticipated. However, this also confirmed one thing. News of his identity as Noah Gould had most likely already spread, and he had gained the trust of the Norton Empire. That was why a 7th tier knight had come to him. Mag had done some research on the feud between Noah Gould and Timothy back in Rodu. The fact that a 7th tier knight was sent to kill him was a clear indication of just how deep the feud was between the two of them. The fact that Noah Gould had stolen Timothy's wife was a testament to the deep hatred between the two of them. A contemplative look appeared on Mag's face. I can't do it here. Urian's powerful spiritual power will definitely be able to sense everything that's happening here. There won't be any rain to muffle the sound, so I have to find a suitable place to kill him. I heard that the rules of Chaos City are very strict. Before I kill him, I have to confirm that the person I'm killing is Noah, and I can't leave any traces behind. Otherwise, I'll lose more than I gain if those fellows from the Grey Temple catch me. Downstairs, the man in black, Cassidin, was also hesitant and cautious. He slowly approached the restaurant's door, and a cold glint appeared from his sleeve. Right at this moment, a calm voice came from the window on the 2nd floor. Did Timothy send you to find me? Cassidin, who had just grabbed the door handle, froze. Then, he looked up at Meg, who was standing by the window. That fellow under the moonlight looked exactly the same as the portrait in his arms. That was his target. Seems like you know what I'm here for, Noah Gould. Cassidin let go of the door handle, and took 2 steps back. He looked at Meg with a scornful smile, and said, in that case, come down and let me kill you. You'll suffer less, and I'll have less trouble. Why not? You think too little of the mission. You're not a competent assassin. Meg placed his hand on the window and jumped down. The corners of his mouth curved into a smile as he said, come and chase me. If you catch me, I'll let you kill me. As soon as he finished speaking, he broke into a run. Swish, swish. Poisoned arrows and darts flew at Meg from behind, but all of them narrowly missed him and nailed into tree trunks and rocks. This kid's luck is pretty good. He actually dodged all of them. Cassidin frowned. He glanced at the window on the 2nd floor, and a sinister smile appeared on his lips. He seems to have a half-elf daughter. Young Master Timothy wants me to bring her back alive. But now, let's go and kill that guy first. Running to a place where there's no one is around is just what I want. The black figure disappeared into the darkness, and followed Meg from a distance. The Aiden Square was huge. Meg led the guy behind him around the square in a circle, and finally stopped in the most remote stone forest. This place was on the opposite side of Mammoth. Even if something happened, no one would suspect Mammoth. Under the cold moonlight, the landscape here was a miniature version of the Vic Mountain stone forest of the goblins. The 4 to 5 meter tall boulders looked rather spectacular, but in this cold winter night, it seemed a little eerie. Kid, why aren't you running anymore? Cassidin stopped 5 to 6 meters away, and sneered at Meg. This guy's speed was a little beyond his expectations. Even he, who was best at speed, almost lost him a few times. Luckily, he was extremely talented in tracking, and he didn't let him run away in the end. In order to not lose you, I have waited for a long time. Mag smiled as he looked at Cassidin. He had just advanced to the 7th tier, and the sense of power coming from his body made him eager to try. An opponent who was also at the 7th tier was a good practice partner. "Mph, kid, don't talk nonsense." Cassidin's face darkened, and he shouted coldly as he pulled out the short sword at his waist. "I am here on young Master Timothy's orders to take your lowly life. In that case, a duel is inevitable," Meg said solemnly as he pulled out his long sword. "Duel? Ha, you are only at level 4. What right do you have to duel with me? This is just a massacre," Cassidin said with disdain. He took a step forward and stepped into the void. When he appeared again, he was already in front of Mag. However, all his movements suddenly stopped at this moment. His widened eyes slowly moved down, and he looked at the long sword that had pierced his heart in disbelief. You, how could you be so fast? Don't talk nonsense. I can last very long. Meg took a step back with a serious expression and pulled out his long sword. He looked at the unwilling Kassadin, and said helplessly, You are too slow. So slow that I am a little disappointed. We are both at level 7, but why are you so lousy? Boring. Kassadin's eyes widened, and he said with difficulty, You are not. Noah, congratulations, you got it right. I will reward you with a sword. Meg stabbed the long sword in his hand again, and the sword went straight for Kassadin's throat. After wiping the blood off the long sword on Kassadin's clothes, Meg carefully cleaned up the scene. He went back the way he came, cleaned up all the traces, and collected all the hidden weapons that Kassadin had thrown out. After making sure that there were no traces left, he went back into the room through the window. He took a shower again, changed into his pajamas, and lay on the bed. He opened the red braised pork experience bag. It was fat but not greasy. The sweet and soft red braised pork was a home-cooked dish that most people in China love to eat. It had a place in the traditional dishes. Meg was a loyal fan of red braised pork. There were some differences in the way this dish was cooked. For example, there were obvious regional characteristics in the choice of spices. The red braised pork that the system gave him should be a combination of the methods of red braised pork from the north and the south. However, Meg had never tried to make red braised pork before, so he was not sure what kind of flavor it would taste like. However, red braised pork was a dish that he often ate. Back then, he should have made a lot of comments on Weibo. Now that he thought about it, he was really young. He talked so much, but in the end, he was the one who suffered. Come on, red braised pork. I want to see how difficult this dish is. Meg looked back at Amy, who was already asleep. He closed his eyes and pushed open the door to the test field for the God of Cookery. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 974. Red braised pork was not a complicated dish. It was a homely version, and most people could make it just by looking at the tutorial. However, the bad thing was that Mag had indeed made too many unreasonable requests back then. Now, he was the one who had to bear all the consequences. Failure. It's still a failure. System, your request is a little too much. My coloring is already uniform enough, right? Even a brush might not be as standard as mine, and you still say it's a failure, Meg said indignantly as he looked at the bright red braised pork on the plate. Let me correct you. This is not the system's request. You can see the first request. Every piece of red braised pork should be bright red as if it was painted with the most delicate brush. There should be no flaws at all. Fuck, which idiot made this request? Meg rolled his eyes. Weibo user, Meg Shen. Published on May 20th, 2017. Meg, very good. Only with such a ruthless attitude can you make delicious red braised pork. Meg forced a smile. He dumped the bowl of red braised pork in front of him into the kitchen waste bin, and began to make a new bowl of red braised pork. It was a difficult night. Meg wanted to transmigrate back countless times and beat himself to death for bringing the internet celebrity he had just wooed to dinner. Who asked you to talk so much nonsense? Rodu, the second prince's manor. Your Highness, Alex appeared on Dragon Island today. After saving Rankster's daughter, he disappeared again, a man in black reported to Josh respectfully. He has been appearing around Chaos City frequently recently. Continue to look for him in Chaos City and its vicinity, Josh said in a low voice. That man in black hesitated for a while, but still gritted his teeth, and said, But, Your Highness, even if we find Alex, with his ability, no one can pose a threat to him. Instead, we might provoke him to take revenge. Josh's gaze turned cold. He looked at the man in black and coldly said, Even if you are going to take revenge, you must find him for me. I want to know his whereabouts and where he hid his daughter. Only when I find his daughter can I control him and make him no fear. But The man in black still wanted to say something. You only have 3 months. Before the peace agreement is signed, you must find him. Otherwise, all of you will commit suicide. Joshua coldly interrupted the black-clothed man. Yes. The black-robed man's face turned pale in an instant. He quickly responded and left. Joshua looked at the butler and asked, "How's the situation in the Wind Forest?" "Reporting to your highness, the spies have reported that after Princess Irina was deposed, she has been in seclusion with the Tree of Life. The Spring of Life was cut off for a period of time, but a few days ago, spring water began to gush out again. However, Princess Irina still hasn't appeared. The Elven Queen was still in seclusion, and no one knew when she would come out. According to the think tank, there was a 50% chance that she was already dead. Helena didn't explain why she had joined forces with the First Highness, and even stopped communicating with him for the past month. Borge, on the other hand, has tried to contact us," the butler explained clearly. "Borge is making such a big fuss because he wants to become the first Elven king in the history of the elves, right?" Josh pursed his lips in a mocking manner, and said, "Heh, what a bold idea. Only Irina can take that position and then marry me. Only then will she be able to unleash her greatest potential." "Your Highness, are we going to reject Borge's contact?" the butler asked. "No, let's contact them and see what Borge wants." Joshua shook his head. "Helena's situation is unclear. If she really intends to give up on cooperating with us and work with Sean, then we have to make preparations as soon as possible. Borge's status and power in the Elven race are now no less than Helena's. Furthermore, he's even more stupid. All right, I'll make the arrangements now." The butler nodded and quickly left. "Alex, although you're back again, I'll make sure you die completely next time." A cold voice echoed in the room. The Wind Forest. Under the Tree of Life, Irina, whose aura had completely recovered to its peak, walked around the Tree of Life in confusion. She muttered, "That's strange. Why did all the undead aura suddenly disappear?" The branches of the Tree of Life had all recovered their tender green color, and the countless hanging branches were exuding a rich aura of life. It was like the spring day, and the branches swayed cheerfully. It seemed to be in a very good mood. Could it be the god of life? But it doesn't seem like it. I didn't feel the arrival of life magic. It seems to be because of the heavy rain that night. Irina shook her head, still puzzled. Forget it. What's certain is that my old friend and I have completely recovered. So, it's time to do something now. A smile appeared on Irina's face. She tapped her feet lightly, and jumped out of the opening at the top of the cave. Standing on top of the cave, she cleared her throat, and loudly said, "I, Irina, am back again." A crisp and pleasant voice reverberated throughout the entire Wind Forest and into the ears of all of the elves. Princess Irina. Some elves were shocked, some elves exclaimed, some elves were sad, and some elves were elated. "It's the princess." Sally, who was about to follow Elliot to Mistress Helena's cave abode, stopped in her tracks, and looked in the direction of the Tree of Life's cave with surprise and joy. Has she completely recovered? Elliot's expression was a little complicated. He looked at the elated Sally, and continued to walk forward. Sally withdrew her gaze, and quickly followed Elliot. She was going to accept the final vote from the elders today, and that would determine whether she could become the new elven princess. Of course, she knew that as long as Irina was around, no one in this world could replace her position in the hearts of the ordinary elves. She didn't want to replace her, either. She just wanted to protect Irina's position before she officially returned, and not let the elven race fall into the abyss of darkness. In a dark secret room in Borge's mansion, Borge, who was holding an elven skin in his hand, was shocked. He turned around, and revealed a hideous face. There were black traces of corrosion on his face, and in some places, even his bones could be seen. It was a ghastly sight. Irina. How could she have recovered? Borge roared in a hoarse voice. Princess Irina is back. The elven slaves restrained themselves and cheered. The joy in their hearts was indescribable. In this forest, the only hope they could feel was Princess Irina. Since freedom has been shackled and abandoned, then tear these shackles apart and return to the souls of the elf. Resist, my people. This time, I will fight by your side. Irina's voice sounded again, and she also left the top of the Tree of Life's cave. Chapter 975. The next morning, Meg woke up with a start. Looking at the alarm clock at 5 o'clock on the bedside, he felt like he was in a dream. It took him more than 50 days and nights to reach the standard he set for himself in the past for a serving of red braised pork. He was standing on the shoulders of countless top chefs, and he practiced without caring about the consumption of ingredients. Even a chef like Meg, who had been in the test field for the god of cookery for a long time, could not bear it. "It seems that I can't speak carelessly, or I'll be punished," Meg muttered with mixed feelings. His body had rested well, but he was a little tired after being tortured by himself. He lay down again and slept for another hour before getting up energetically. The first thing he did after getting out of bed was a set of military boxing exercises. His 7th-tier body really was different. Powerful strength filled every muscle in his body, and Mag felt like he could even take down a dinosaur with a single punch, let alone a cow. Last night, in addition to making red braised pork, Meg also did adaptive training for his body in the test field for the god of cookery. After all, the opponent yesterday was too weak to be of any use. He had to rely on himself for this kind of thing. A level 7 mage would be called a senior mage among mags, and he had entered another level among knights. The strength of a LV7 knight was no longer just a reflection of strength and speed. When combined with the corresponding battle skills, they would be able to erupt with great power. In Alex's memory, there was a combat skill called Thunder Flash, which could be used after level 7. The most important thing that Meg did last night was to practice Thunder Flash. This combat skill could give Meg super speed and explosive power in an instant, and it had a strong growth potential. As his strength increased, the power would continue to increase. It was one of Alex's famous combat skills. If I used Thunder Flash yesterday, that guy might not even have the time to talk. Mag shrugged as he sighed internally. He had been paralyzed when he first came to this world, but now, he had become a high-tier knight, and he was starting to develop his own ideas about being a stay-at-home dad. He was very satisfied with this sense of accomplishment. Since I can't restore my strength to level 10 in a short period of time, it's time to activate Mammoth's Gold membership system. Meg washed his face and walked towards the study. Elizabeth let out a soft moan of comfort. She felt as if she was lying on a soft and comfortable bed, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of sunshine. However, her arm seemed to be pressed down by something soft and round. Although it was a little heavy, it was soft, warm, and quite comfortable. Where am I now? Wasn't I taken away by Alex? Elizabeth opened her eyes and saw the face that was almost in front of her. Elizabeth did not jump away immediately because she was very familiar with this beautiful and delicate face, and she had slept with it before. MIA. It seems that she understood what I said at the end. Elizabeth heaved a sigh of relief. At least this situation was better than waking up next to Alex. If it was the latter, she would definitely stab her sword into his heart. After carefully feeling her body, Elizabeth was surprised to find that her injuries had recovered by 50 to 60%. Although some internal injuries were not so easy to heal, at least simple movements and walking would not be a problem. Is she the one who saved me again? And that elf? Elizabeth's gaze softened as she looked at Yarbemia, who was nestled in her arms. It was a very special feeling to be able to see her the moment she opened her eyes. It was as if there was another figure in her heart that she cared about. It was warm. Then, Elizabeth quickly discovered what was pressing down on her hand. After looking at it for a while, she thought to herself, although she is quite thin, she seems to have developed quite well. She is about my age. Yarbemia subconsciously shrank into Elizabeth's arms. She found a comfortable place to rest her head and went back to sleep. She must have had a hard time all these years, Elizabeth thought to herself as she looked at MIA in her arms. Her heart ached as she hugged her gently. Yarbemia woke up in a warm embrace in a daze. She opened her eyes and froze for a few seconds. She looked at Elizabeth, who seemed to still be sleeping soundly. She was almost completely in Elizabeth's arms, and her head was pillowed on Elizabeth's soft breasts. She blushed, and slowly withdrew from Elizabeth's embrace. Only when she had completely gotten rid of Elizabeth did she secretly heave a sigh of relief. Why is my sleeping posture so bad? Miss Elizabeth is already injured, and I am still lying on top of her. Yarbemia muttered in annoyance. She looked at Elizabeth, who still had her eyes closed, and felt sorry for her. It seems that Miss Elizabeth's injuries are quite serious. She is still sleeping soundly. But I have to go to work now. I will bring her breakfast later. Mia wrote a note and placed it beside the bed. Then, she gently closed the door and went out. Elizabeth opened her eyes and looked at the note beside the bed. A smile appeared on her face. It said, "Miss Elizabeth, I am Mia. Please rest well in the room. I will bring you breakfast later. Please do not wander around." The door was pushed open again. Elizabeth hurriedly closed her eyes. Yarbemia walked in with a glass of water. She gently placed it on the bedside table. She glanced at Elizabeth before turning to leave. Elizabeth slowly sat up and took a sip of the warm water. It seemed to be very light honey water. It was slightly sweet and warm. It was very considerate. If I stay here, I will bring her a lot of trouble, won't I? If Fox finds out that I am here, he will definitely send people to deal with me, Elizabeth thought to herself. She looked at the pink room with a heavy expression. I will leave immediately after I recover, Elizabeth whispered to herself after a while. Until then, I will just stay here quietly. Announcement: in order to maintain order and peace in the restaurant, Mammy Restaurant was going to introduce a gold member system. All customers above the 7th tier would become a gold member of Mammy Restaurant as long as they were willing to help Mammy Restaurant once when Boss Mag needed them and sign the letter of commitment. Exclusive benefits for gold members: 1. You can order one more serving of tofu pudding every week. Non-complimentary. You have to pay the bill. 2. You will have a chance to be selected as a taster for a new dish. Eat the delicious food first. 3. To be continued. If you are interested in becoming a gold member, please ask the waiter after paying the bill to obtain the letter of commitment and a gold member card. Chapter 976. Outside Mammoth, someone read out the new notice on the restaurant's door loudly, causing an uproar among the customers. They can order an extra helping of tofu pudding every week. That's so good. My goodness. Doesn't that mean the gold members can order 2 helping of tofu pudding every Monday? No. I won't listen. I won't listen. I can't stand this. I'm still a baby. How can I reach the 7th tier? Most of the customers were lamenting. After all, a 7th tier powerhouse was considered a high-level combatant even on the Norland continent. Not everyone could reach that level. Although I can't become a gold member, I still agree with Mr. Mac's system. After all, there's a high chance that someone will come to Mammoth. If something happens to the restaurant and Mr. Mac, we won't be able to enjoy the delicious food, Harrison said with a smile. I agree. Just imagining having 2 helping of sweet tofu pudding every Monday is enough to make me happy. I have to work hard and reach the 7th tier as soon as possible, a middle-aged man said with a serious expression. His eyes were burning with fighting spirit. I wonder if it will take effect immediately after I join today. I can't wait to have 2 bowls of savory tofu pudding, Brandley said with a smile. Everyone was discussing the new announcement in a lively manner. Even though they were a little surprised by Mag's novel idea, most of the customers were very welcoming and supportive of it, even those who weren't as powerful as the gold members. However, some customers were also worried that if they could satisfy gold members with 2 helping of tofu pudding, it would be difficult for ordinary customers to eat tofu pudding. Yarbemia, who was taking a bite of his Ruggiamo, looked at Meg and said, "Boss, will there really be 7th tier powerhouses who can become gold members?" "Yeah. Those people are 7th tier powerhouses. I don't think they'll bend over backwards for a helping of tofu pudding, right?" Barbara was also skeptical. "From now on, I'll give you an extra beef kebab for every meal. Are you willing to help Mammoth when it's in danger?" Meg asked as he looked at Barbara. "I'm willing," Barbara blurted out, and a faint blush appeared on Barbara's face as she sensed the peculiar gazes directed at her. However, she still feigned calmness as she said, "I didn't do it for a kebab, I just didn't want to have to clean up after the restaurant was destroyed. That's great. I was going to add you, but I didn't expect Barbara to be so noble, Meg said with a smile. But Barbara raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. She looked at the plate of beef kebabs in front of Mag, and said, if you really want to give me more, then I won't turn you down. I deserve it. Let's eat. Meg smiled and placed a kebab on Barbara's plate. Will a superpower be created because of this? Shirley thought to herself thoughtfully. She had also seen the notice when she entered the restaurant. On the surface, it seemed to be Mammy Restaurant's way of protecting itself. However, if there were a lot of gold members, then they would be a group of very scary experts. If they were to make a move once, no matter what the reason was, many powers would have to think twice before making a move. Welcome. When it was time, Meg pushed the door open and looked at the customers with a smile. He said loudly, from today onwards, the amount of tofu pudding for every meal will be increased from 200 to 300 servings. The tofu pudding ordered by the gold members will not be included in the 300 servings. Long live Mr. Mac. Mr. Mac is invincible. The restaurant's entrance was silent for a while before it was filled with cheers. Mr. Mac, if anyone dares to touch Amy or Mammis, I'll beat them to death. Crassus looked at Meg and said with a smile, I want to have 2 servings of sweet tofu pudding this morning. I'll order them now. I want 2 servings of savory tofu pudding, Julian said from the side and walked in first. Sure, Meg replied with a smile. These 2's words were like a protective talisman. Mr. Mac, although I don't eat tofu pudding, I still want to become a gold member of Mammis. I'll sign that letter of commitment. Sargeras smiled and touched his bald head. Anna, give Mr. Sargeras a letter of commitment and a gold card. Meg turned around and said. Anna handed a piece of paper to Sargeras. He wrote his name on it seriously and handed it back to Anna. Then, he took the gold card from Anna. With Crassus and Julian taking the lead, and Sargeras setting an excellent example, many powerful figures among the customers also signed the letter of commitment and received a gold card from Anna. Meg looked at this scene with a smile. It seemed to be much smoother than he had expected. After the morning service hours, Anna put the last letter of commitment on the counter and pressed it with Ugly Duckling. She looked at Meg and said, Uncle Meg, we received a total of 10 letters of commitment and 10 gold cards this morning. Thank you, Anna. Mag patted Anna's head with a smile. There were 10 letters of commitment from powerhouses above the 7th tier, including 2 legendary great magic casters, 1 9th tier magic caster, 2 8th tier demons, 1 8th tier elf, and 4 7th tier powerhouses. Among the customers who came to the restaurant in the morning, there were 12 who were above the 7th tier. This was a very high ratio. One had to know that this was only the customers who came for breakfast. There would be more customers in the afternoon and evening. As long as they could get the promises of 50 powerhouses above the 7th tier, no one on the Norland continent would dare to cause trouble at Mammis. No matter how the situation changed in the future, Mammis would be able to protect herself. As for how to use that attack, that would be Meg's ultimate trump card. Those stupid elves in the Wind Forest better not mess around. Otherwise, he would let them have a taste of the wrath of foodies. Meg looked at Yarbemia, and said, MIA, I heard from 1111 that you took in an injured girl, right? Yes. Yarbemia nodded. She looked at Meg with embarrassment, and said, I'm sorry, boss. I shouldn't have let others stay in the dormitory without your permission. I'm not scolding you. Saving someone is a good thing. You should be praised. Meg shook his head with a smile. He turned and went into the kitchen. Soon, he came out with an insulated lunchbox. He handed it to MIA, and said, there's a plate of Yeongju fried rice, a bowl of sweet tofu pudding, and some chicken soup in here. Give it to her, but from this afternoon onwards, you have to eat your own food. I'll cook for her separately. Boss. Yarbemia looked at Meg. She was so touched that tears welled up in Meg's eyes. She threw herself into Meg's arms. Meg's hand froze awkwardly. He patted Mia's shoulder gently with a smile on his face. Uncle Meg hugged big sister MIA with a weird smile on his face. Anna murmured in a corner. Should we tell Amy? Chapter 977. In a tea house, Robert looked at Derek, who was sitting opposite him, concernedly, and said, "Mr. Derek, the progress of your food tasting review seems to have stopped for 3 days. Are you feeling unwell?" Derek, who was about to take a sip from his teacup, froze. He hesitated for a while before putting the teacup down, and embarrassedly said, "It's not that I'm feeling unwell. It's just that I recently came across a restaurant that was too delicious. I can't help but go to that restaurant every time it's mealtime. By the time I'm done eating, I can't eat anything else." Robert looked at Derek in shock. He was a famous food critic in the entire culinary world. How could he stop because of a restaurant? He thought for a while, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Could it be Mammis? Yes. So President Robert knows about this restaurant too. Derek nodded. Mr. Mac's culinary skills are the best in Chaos City. He was even named the best chef by the King of the Roth Empire during the King's birthday banquet. How could I not know? Robert said with a smile. However, he looked at Derek as if he wanted to say something. Derek obviously knew what Robert wanted to say. He sincerely said, "To be honest, the standard of Chaos City's food and beverage is indeed quite different from Rodu's. There are even many restaurants that don't sell vegetarian dishes. Most of them lack respect for vegetarian dishes. It's very difficult to find a restaurant that can satisfy my appetite. So, if the president has any filtered list, please give me a copy. If I have to try all the restaurants on the list, this mission is obviously impossible for me." Robert looked troubled. The Food Association had cut off all means of retreat this time and came up with a new set of rules to select truly outstanding dishes and restaurants. If they were to screen them before letting Derek make the judgment, it would be a little different from their original intention. However, Derek was right. There were many restaurants in Chaos City that were very perfunctory about vegetarian dishes. For a gourmet like Derek, it was unrealistic to keep trying these lousy vegetarian dishes. Furthermore, he didn't have enough time at the moment. After hesitating for a while, Robert looked at Derek and nodded. "All right, Mr. Derek. Someone will hand over the new list of restaurants to you tomorrow morning. You just need to try the restaurants on the new list." Derek's reputation and prestige were number one among the judges this time. If he could introduce more of Chaos City's delicacies in his food review, perhaps some chefs would come to Chaos City because of his reputation. That would inject new vitality into Chaos City's food and beverage industry, which would have a good effect on the development of Chaos City's food and beverage industry. Do you know what happiness is? In the Aiden Square, a white-haired old man with a wooden staff looked at a child who was sitting on a chair and eating candy with a smile. "Grandpa, I used my last copper coin to buy the bursting fireball spell from that grandpa just now. I don't have money to buy a new one." The child took out a magic book from behind his back and shook his head. Shallow. Happiness is not something that can be bought with a copper coin. The old man shook his head and looked at the little boy with disappointment. He shook his head and walked to the next child. A corner of a secret manual of the same style peeked out from the bag he was carrying. The old man, Angus, walked all over the Aiden Square for the entire morning, and finally sold a secret manual for a copper coin. Today is really a happy day. Angus lay on a recliner in the corner, and placed the copper coin in front of his eyes to look at it under the sunlight. A bright smile appeared on his wrinkled face, and half of his teeth were rotten when he opened his mouth. "Old man, are you that happy to earn a copper coin?" a young man asked with a smile. He was standing beside the recliner. Angus put away the copper coin when he heard that, and sat up with the help of the recliner. He looked at the well-dressed young man with a smile, and said, "If you buy another one, I should feel even happier." "I want 2. Meg took out 2 copper coins from his pocket and handed them to Angus with a smile. He was out for a walk to bask in the sun out of boredom, and then he saw this old man who was selling fake magic books to the children. Although this kind of behavior was somewhat fraudulent, 1 copper coin was still a profit even if he could buy a comic book, so Meg did not have much objection to it. Looking at this old man who was wearing a shabby cotton-padded jacket and had a slightly stooped figure, he felt pity for him. If he had the means, why would an old man of this age have to keep bending over in the cold wind for a copper coin? Angus took the copper coin and took out a magic book called Inferno of the Heavens from his satchel. He passed it to Mag with a smile, and said, "One person can only buy one. More than one can't do it. It's easy to go astray. One will do." Meg looked at the palm-sized thin booklet in his hand. It was indeed similar to the comic books he had when he was young. He did not force it, and put away the other copper coin, and prepared to leave. "Young man, what do you think happiness is?" Angus looked at Meg and asked with a smile. "Happiness?" Meg stopped in his tracks and thought seriously for a while. He smiled, and said, "I used to feel that I had an endless amount of money to spend, and that I was quite happy. Now my goals are higher, and I can only feel happiness when I'm with my daughter." Angus looked at the smile on Meg's face, and his eyes dimmed. He nodded, and said, "Yes, being with a child is indeed the happiest." "Old man, it's cold, go home early," Meg said with a smile. With a flick of his finger, a gold coin quietly fell into the open pocket, and he turned to leave. "Home is too far away, I can't go back. Young man, are you willing to listen to my story?" Angus shook his head and looked at Meg's back. Meg turned to look at Angus. "If my son hadn't gone missing, he would be about the same age as you now." Angus looked at Meg, and sighed. His eyes were full of regret. Meg looked at Angus. This old man seemed to have lost everything at this moment. He felt his heart clench. After a moment of silence, he said, he could be living a good life somewhere now, with a cute child and a good family. Angus's eyes lit up again, and he choked as he said, "Thank you." Meg sat down beside Angus, and asked him softly, "Old man, where are you from?" "I'm from the Roth Empire, and I'm from Rodu. I used to have a few houses and shops. 25 years ago, my 3-year-old son went missing while he was playing at the door. After my wife and child went missing, she cried every day, and passed away the next year. I've been traveling from the south to the north, and all over the Roth Empire, but I haven't found any trace of my son." Chapter 978. Angus's story was very long. His narration was a little intermittent, and his thoughts were not very coherent. However, Meg, who was sitting at the side, listened attentively the entire time. His brows were slightly furrowed, and there was pity and anger in his eyes. Human traffickers had shattered an originally perfect and happy family. A rich man who had a son in his old age had become a homeless man who measured the Norland continent with his feet. Meg did not have much feelings about human traffickers in the past, but it was different now. If someone were to kidnap Amy and he could never see her again, he would probably embark on a journey to find her just like Angus. Even if he had to turn the entire Norland continent upside down, he had to find her. Meg looked at Angus with admiration in his eyes. "I've been searching in Chaos City for more than a month. Although I didn't find any news, this is a good place. It's really a good place." Angus looked at the children playing in the square, and a smile appeared on his sorrowful face. "Look, those children are so cute. They're having so much fun. Even in Rodu, it's rare to see so many children gathering together to play. Yes, Chaos City is indeed a good place." Meg nodded with a smile too. Then, he looked at Angus, and said, "Then, what are your plans after this? Are you going to continue searching in Chaos City? Or are you going to other places? Chaos City is too big. I'm old, and my brain is useless. This old man doesn't know where to start searching. I've been searching for a month, and I don't even know which places I've searched and which I haven't." Angus shook his head, and helplessly said, "I've decided to go back to the Roth Empire to search. I'll set off in a while before it snows. I'll go to the last place to take a look. When the snow falls, I'll probably have to leave too." Meg was silent as he looked at Angus. He had a million words of consolation in his heart, but he couldn't say a single one. How could he have the right to ask others to let it go without experiencing that kind of pain? "Thank you, young man, for taking the time to listen to this old man's useless nonsense," Angus said to Meg gratefully. "I should be the one thanking you for teaching me how to be a father." Meg shook his head. "As a father, don't learn from me." August hurriedly shook his head. Meg stood up and smiled at Angus, saying, "I've heard your story, so you'll have to eat my cooking before you leave. Elder, let's go and have a seat at my place. I'll send you off." "How can this be?" How can a person like me go to your house? No, no. August pointed at his shabby cotton-padded jacket and shook his head. Even if he's the king of the Roth Empire, I can't be bothered to invite him to my house as a guest. What has this got to do with your attire? Meg smiled and picked up the stick for Angus. Let's go. It's just ahead. Eat your fill before continuing. It's getting colder as we head north. Angus looked at Meg's bright eyes, and a smile appeared on his face. He nodded and said, Then I'll accept your invitation. I'll be thick-skinned and have a meal with you. Face is only useful when it can be exchanged for food, Meg said with a smile. Angus chuckled as well. Meg brought Angus to Amy's slowly. When Meg opened the restaurant's door, Angus stopped in his tracks. Elder, come in, Meg said to Angus as he turned to look at him. No, no. How can I enter such a high-class and clean restaurant? How am I going to receive customers if I dirty it? Angus shook his head repeatedly. He looked at Meg and said, Thank you, young man. I've already felt your kind intentions, but I have to go now. This is my restaurant. Before it opens today, you're the only customer. Speaking of which, I was once a citizen of the Roth Empire, too, Meg said with a smile. Angus looked at the sincere smile on Meg's face, and then at the restaurant that was so clean that it seemed to be glowing. He hesitated for a long time before nodding. He walked into the restaurant slowly, but stopped after taking a few steps. He looked left and right, and didn't continue walking in. Instead, he sat down at the seat closest to the door. He only took a small seat, and appeared to be rather reserved. Drink some water first. I'll cook for you. Meg poured a glass of water and placed it in front of Angus before turning to walk to the kitchen. Boss, who is he? Phyllis looked at Angus strangely. It wasn't opening hours yet. Why did Meg specially cook for a customer? Moreover, judging from his clothes, he didn't look like a customer who could afford the meal. An old man with a story. I want to give him a meal. Meg recalled the results of the omniscient doors scan when Angus walked in just now. Those terminal and incurable diseases made him clearly realize that Angus wasn't spouting nonsense. He really couldn't survive this winter. He wandered for 25 years and went bankrupt, but he didn't complain at all. He had been living in regret and self-blame. If he couldn't see his son whom he had been separated from for more than 20 years until his death, it would undoubtedly be a huge regret for Angus. Meg also felt a deep sense of helplessness in this matter. After all, this was a child who had been lost in Rodu 25 years ago. After so many years, it was unknown what he had become, or even if he was still alive in this world. Wait, what does he look like? Meg's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said in his heart, System, can you draw a portrait of that child based on the physical characteristics that Angus described when he was young? This system usually won't do such things that don't concern itself with proper duties, the system said leisurely. One portrait, 10,000 copper coins, Meg said calmly. Esteemed host, the system is happy to be of service to you. This system has done systematic and comprehensive research on portraiture, and also has an extremely deep understanding of human evolution and development. If there is accurate physical characteristics information, and the father's DNA is collected, the portrait drawn by this system will be far more accurate than any criminal portraitist. The system's humble and confident voice sounded. Very good. If the person is found, you will receive a reward of 1 copper coin. Meg nodded slightly. He had a new train of thought now. This is too blissful. A line of words floated past silently. Meg pursed his lips. The system's blissful life was so simple. What a useless system. However, Meg was still at ease with the portrait produced by the system. He had once browsed news about portraitists helping to reunite long-lost relatives. This portrait was at least much simpler and more effective than Angus's description of a 5-year-old child and finding a 30-year-old young man. After all, 25 years had passed. Even if that child stood in front of Angus again, it would be difficult for him to recognize him. Moreover, Meg had Mammoth's platform. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 979. How can there be such a beautiful and exquisite restaurant in this world? Even in Rodu, I have never seen such a beautiful restaurant. Angus sized up the restaurant with amazement in his eyes. His family was quite well off back then, and he had tried all the famous restaurants in Rodu. But in terms of exquisiteness and beauty, there was really no one that could compare to this mammoth. Of course, in his eyes, gold and diamonds were not considered beautiful. They were just more dazzling. But Mammoth's 2 huge crystals had completely surpassed the countless gold and gems, and were extremely stunning. The meals in such a restaurant must be very expensive, right? But Angus touched the only copper coin in his pocket and sighed silently in his heart. He felt as if he was sitting on a carpet of needles, and was a little restless. He could only hold the cup of water and drink it one mouthful after another. 10 minutes later, Meg walked out with a plate of red braised pork and a bowl of rice. He placed it in front of Angus, and said with a smile, "This is red braised pork, the new dish that the restaurant is going to launch today. No customer has tried it yet. Old man, can you help me try the taste? It smells so good." Angus's eyes had already lit up. The rich aroma of the meat wafted to his nose, and it was better than any meat that he had eaten in the past. Looking at the red braised pork in the black terracotta bowl again, it was a mixture of fat and lean meat, and the color was bright red. Even the meat skin had a crystal clear and chewy feeling, making one want to swallow their saliva. Meat. I can smell it just from this aroma. It's definitely a rare delicacy in the world. It's just that my teeth are not good, and I haven't been able to chew meat for many years. I can only thank you for your kindness, boss. Angus sighed softly with a look of pity. It was really a pity that he could only look at such delicacies but not eat them. Meg smiled, and said, "Don't rush to a conclusion. This is a dish that is also very friendly to old people. If you don't try it, how will you know if it's suitable? Can I chew it?" Angus was surprised when he heard that. He looked at the smiling Meg, and hesitated for a while before picking up a piece of red braised pork with his chopsticks. The cube-shaped pork had distinct skin, fat, and lean meat. It was a piece of meat that would normally make people feel greasy, but now it looked like it made people want to give it a try. Angus put the braised pork to his mouth and took a bite of the pig skin, which was usually the hardest to chew. Yes. The pig skin, which was usually extremely tough, was easily cut open by his broken teeth. It was as if he did not feel the slightest bit of obstruction. The fatty meat under the pigskin melted in his mouth. As he chewed carefully, the strength of his bite was barely discernible, and there was no pressure at all. The sweet and soft red braised meat was fat but not greasy. With a gentle bite, the sweet gravy overflowed from the meat. The delicious taste of the red braised meat was perfectly released at this moment. The taste of meat that he hadn't tasted for a long time made Angus's taste buds cheer. He couldn't help but indulge in the delicacy that he had never tasted before. The delicious red braised pork, together with the soft rice, drove away all the coldness of the winter, immersing people in the warmth of the delicious taste. He thought of some people, his wife who had supported him in times of need, and his son who surrounded him at his knees. Those few years were the happiest time of his life. If that incident hadn't happened, their family of 3 would be able to live a very happy life in Rodu now. A drop of tear rolled down Angus's old face slowly and landed on the ground. Angus put down the chopsticks in his hand and looked at the empty bowl in front of him. He looked at Meg, and said, "Boss, thank you. This is the most delicious food I've ever eaten." "Let me get you another bowl of rice," Meg said with a smile as he picked up the bowl and walked towards the kitchen. Soon, he came out with another bowl of rice. It seemed like this red braised meat had a very good adaptability. Even an old man with bad teeth could have another bowl. It could be considered as a successful research. Angus finished the second bowl of rice and the entire bowl of red braised meat. There wasn't even a drop of gravy left. "I have wine and meat. Let's have a drink." Meg walked out with a plate of beef kebabs and 2 large mugs of beer. He placed one mug in front of Angus and the other in front of himself. I've made you spend money again." Angus's face was full of guilt. But when he saw the white bubbles of beer in the mugs and the fragrance of the wine in the air, he couldn't help but gulp again. He used to be a person who couldn't sleep without a drink before bed. But later on, in order to go further, he really couldn't afford to drink alcohol, so he gradually quit. It should have been more than half a year since he drank half a drop of alcohol. The last time he drank was when he picked up a broken wine jar and drank a few mouthfuls of wine mixed with rainwater. Meg raised the mug and gestured. Angus carefully held the mug with both hands and gestured to Meg. Then, he leaned to the edge of the mug and took a small sip. The cold and refreshing beer was even sweeter than the clear spring water in the mountains. It had a faint barley aroma and a special fragrance. It was similar to barley wine, but compared to the slightly bitter barley wine, this refreshing and delicious beer made him want to drink more. Good wine. Angus praised and tried to take another big sip. The grease from the red braised pork previously had completely disappeared. Although it was a little cold in the winter, for an old drunkard, it was more refreshing. Angus finished the mug of beer in a short while and burped. Meg refilled his mug and said, "Old man, I'm actually a portrait artist. If you believe me, maybe you can tell me how your child looks like. I'll draw you a possible appearance of him now. You can take the picture and find someone. The success rate may be higher." "Really?" Angus looked at Meg in surprise. "Yes." Meg nodded. "My child." Angus began to sink into deep thought. Then, he began to describe the physical characteristics of the child who went missing 25 years ago. According to the system's instructions, Mag guided Angus's memories and tried his best to restore his real appearance, and not the image that was living in Angus's imagination. There is a black mole on the left side of the forehead and a crescent-shaped scar on the back of the head. His real name is Beck Basel. Meg began to confirm the key information. Ding. Information recording complete. Ding. Gene sampling complete. Entering the analysis and drawing stage. According to the probability of genetic mutation, the system will draw 3 possible appearances and provide views from 3 directions. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "Well done. I'll reward you with a copper coin," Meg said with satisfaction. "It's the system's honor to serve you. The system will wholeheartedly provide you with better service." The system's excited and flattering voice sounded. Chapter 980. Give me a moment. I'll go upstairs to draw the portrait for you. After you get the portrait, you can go to the City Lord's castle to ask. They might be able to give you some help. After that, I'll help you put up some missing persons notices. After all, Chaos City has a population of over 1 million. Maybe you can stay for a few more days and give it a try, Meg said as he finished the beer in his cup in one gulp. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to thank you." Angus bowed deeply to Meg with reddened eyes. "It's nothing." Meg shook his head with a smile. He turned and walked upstairs, and took out the 3 stacks of pictures that the system had sent to the wrong place from the wardrobe. The pictures were very similar to the color photos, but they were actually oil paintings in order to make it look more realistic. The man in the 3 pictures looked similar, but there were some differences in the shape of his face and facial features. The mole between his left eyebrow and the crescent scar at the back of his head made him look rather handsome. He didn't have the face of an ordinary passerby. Apart from the front of his face, the system had also drawn the side of his face in the same picture. He shouldn't have been to Amy's before. I don't have any impression of him. Meg stared at the 3 pictures for a while and shook his head. Then, he said in his heart, "System, in these 3 pictures, which one has the highest probability of him looking like now?" According to the system's comparison of 100 million human genetic samples, the probability of him looking like the middle picture is 95%. "The other 2 pictures are only supplementary," the system replied. "Then I'll choose this one." Meg threw the other 2 stacks of pictures into the trash can at the side. He put one of them in the pocket of his apron, and then went downstairs with the other one. Angus had already finished his 2nd cup of beer, and hadn't eaten the kebab on his plate. He was looking anxiously in the direction of the staircase. Did this grandpa lose his child? How pitiful. In the kitchen, Anna looked at Angus with pity. "Yes." Phyllis also nodded. Then, she curiously asked, "Boss, You only heard him talk about how the child looked like when he was 5 or 6 years old. Can you really draw him out now? When Meg came downstairs, Angus stood up at once. This might be what he looks like now. Meg handed the photo to Angus. Angus's hands trembled as he took the photo. Tears began to flow down his face as soon as he took a look at it. The young man in the photo was 70 to 80% similar to him when he was young. His eyebrows and eyes were exactly the same as the child in his memory. With just a glance, he could confirm that this was his child. Thank you, thank you. This is my child. This is really my child. Angus bowed deeply to Meg. His emotions were beyond words. Uncle Meg actually managed to draw the child's grown-up appearance. Amazing. Anna looked at Mag with admiration in her eyes. Yes, and his speed is so fast. He finished it in a short while. Phyllis was also amazed. Meg reached out to help Angus up. He smiled and said, "You're welcome. Take this photo to the City Lord's mansion and ask for help. They should be able to arrange a place for you to stay and some food for a short period of time. However, I can't be sure if they will search for you wantonly. At the same time, I will put up a missing person notice at the entrance of the restaurant. If there is any news, I will inform you immediately." Thank you, thank you. Angus looked at Meg and repeated these words. I hope that every child who is forced to leave home can find their own home. Meg smiled and shook his head. It took Angus a while to calm down. He carefully put away the photo. When he turned around, he saw the long line outside the restaurant. He hurriedly said, "The customers are coming to eat. I can't affect the boss's business. I'll leave now." "Don't worry. It's not business hours yet." Meg comforted him. "I've eaten such delicious food made by the boss, but I can't pay for the meal. I'm so sorry." Angus looked at the empty bowl on the table with a guilty expression. "No, you can." Meg shook his head and smiled. "This meal is 1 copper coin in total." Angus was slightly taken aback. Then, a smile appeared on his face. He reached into his pocket and took out 2 copper coins. He put them in Meg's hand. 1 copper coin is for the meal. The other copper coin is for the food. Thank you. This is the best compliment I've heard today. Meg put away the 2 copper coins and smiled. Although 1 copper coin was not much, no customer would use half of their wealth as a tip. "I'm Angus. How should I address you?" Meg opened the door and sent Angus out. Angus walked to the door and asked Meg. "You can call me Mr. Mac like the others," Meg said with a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Mac." Angus bowed again and turned to leave slowly. Hey! The restaurant hasn't even started business yet, but a customer has already finished his meal. Mr. Mac personally sent him out. Could it be some big shot? The customers lining up outside the restaurant were discussing curiously. Such a situation was rare. "We'll be releasing a new dish at noon today, red braised pork." Meg did not explain further. Instead, he looked at the customers and smiled. "Wow. Mr. Mac, you're too outstanding. You're releasing a new dish. Although I don't know how red braised pork is cooked, I think it'll be delicious." The customers were suddenly in an uproar. They were indescribably excited. Meg turned to go in with a smile. After that, he went upstairs to write a missing person notice and pasted that photo on it. After that, he went downstairs and pasted the missing person notice on the door. Although there was still half an hour before the opening of the restaurant, there were already more than 100 customers lining up at the entrance of Mammy Restaurant. Everyone was looking at Mag curiously as to what he was doing. "Dear customers, I have a favor to ask of everyone. This is a missing person notice. An old man from Rodu wandered around the Norland continent for 25 years in order to find his child who was stolen by human traffickers 25 years ago. After that, he came to Chaos City. This might be what the child looks like now, and some basic information about him. If anyone can provide any key information or find him directly, this restaurant will provide a luxurious 2-set meal. All the delicacies on Amy's menu are free of charge and limited to 2 people at a time," Meg said loudly to the customers. There was a moment of silence outside Amy's before an uproar broke out. "Oh my God! Did I hear wrongly? All the delicacies are free of charge. This is a super reward. Does it include tofu pudding? If it includes tofu pudding, I'm willing to marry whoever finds it and bring me along, a delicate-looking woman screamed. All right, I've found a way to get rid of my singlehood. Chapter 981. Meg's new notice created quite a commotion among the customers as the reward was simply too tempting. Mammis provided an unlimited supply of delicacies, including tofu pudding. Almost all of the customers would stop to take a look as they entered the restaurant, trying to remember that very human-like portrait. Even though they didn't know him, what if they met him on the road? Some people even took out little notebooks to record the key information, and were prepared to go and search for him. Yarbemia and the rest also found out about what Mag had done during lunch. Looking at the customers who were reading the missing person notices seriously when they came in, Yarbemia couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Boss is really a kind person. Mammis. This restaurant has become quite famous recently. I heard that it has already surpassed Duca's restaurant to become the #1 restaurant in Chaos City. I just don't know if it lives up to its name. After all, Beat's roast pig is quite good. The rankings on the meat rankings have to be based on strength. Outside Mammis, a grey-haired old man looked up at the signboard, and then followed the crowd into the restaurant. Avis left Chaos City for Rodu at the age of 16, and became an apprentice chef at Reed Restaurant. After that, he worked at Reed Restaurant for 50 years, and became the sous chef. Reed Restaurant was one of the top 5 restaurants in Rodu, and was extremely popular and famous. Roast pig was the signature dish of Reed Restaurant, and was also known as the #1 pig in Rodu. Beat had been an apprentice chef at Reed Restaurant for 10 years, and he was Avis's disciple. After that, Beat left Reed Restaurant and returned to Chaos City, and became the head chef of Duca's restaurant. With his roast pig dish, Duca's restaurant became the #1 restaurant in Chaos City. Avis was quite fond of Beat's disciple, who was quite talented. He was also the one who suggested to him to open Reed Restaurant. Rodu was a place with a very strict hierarchy. Avis had spent 50 years as the chef with the best roast pig dish at Reed Restaurant, but he could only become the sous chef. As such, he didn't want to see Beat, who was also from Chaos City, waste his entire life here, only to be unable to ascend to the position where he could make all the decisions. Just some time ago, he ended his career as a chef in Reed with the excuse of being unwell. He also turned down other restaurants' offers of high salaries, and returned to Chaos City to enjoy his old age. His children and grandchildren were all living in Chaos City. But this time, Robert had come to ask him to be the judge of the meat rankings. He had only agreed after Robert's dream of revitalizing Chaos City's food and beverage industry. Although Beat was his disciple, Avis didn't tell him about him being a judge. In order not to affect his subjective judgment, he put Duca's restaurant's name at the end of the list. The first restaurant he chose for lunch was Mammis. He was surprised by how popular it was. The long line outside the restaurant was even more exaggerated than Rui de Restaurant. However, the popularity wouldn't affect his judgment because he only needed to judge the meat rankings. For a restaurant to become popular, one delicious dish was enough. For example, Reed Restaurant's roast pig. Actually, there was another reason why Avis agreed to Robert's invitation. It was the boss of Mammis, Mr. Meg. As the sous chef of Reed Restaurant, he was naturally present at the birthday banquet of the Roth Empire's king. Reed Restaurant's roast pig had won the title of the best dish of the palace banquet 3 times. He was in charge of all the roasting work twice. Hence, he only saw head chef Bellman as his rival for the best dish of the palace banquet this time. However, no one would have thought that the best dish of the palace banquet would be won by an unknown young chef. The king didn't even taste the roast pig that was served later. This incident was also the reason why he chose to leave Reed. It was undoubtedly a very serious setback for him. Furthermore, he was also very curious when such a young and impressive chef appeared in Chaos City. He couldn't help but want to come back and take a look. Avis glanced at the missing person notice on the door when he entered the restaurant. Being able to help a wanderer find his long-lost son gave him a different understanding of that young chef. As he came early, There were still seats available when Avis followed the crowd into the restaurant. He sat down and looked around the restaurant. Compared to Reed Restaurant, which had 4 floors, this mammoth wasn't considered big. It couldn't even compare to the first floor of Reed Restaurant. However, the restaurant's decor made people feel very comfortable. There were pure wooden tables and chairs. If one looked closely, they could even see that the patterns on all of them were the same. There were pleasant green plants hanging on the balustrades that weren't completely partitioned off. It made people feel warm to be able to see such a scenery in the early winter. The murals on the walls were very grand, and the divisions between the different races were very unique. What surprised Avis even more was that not only was the restaurant not divided into sections, it wasn't even divided into tables. Demons and elves sat at the same table, and orcs and humans sat side by side. Such a scene was rare even in Chaos City. This boss does seem to be quite capable, Avis thought to himself. Then, he picked up the menu on the table and flipped it open. The dishes with pictures jumped into his eyes, and his eyes lit up. At the same time, he was a little surprised. On this menu, even the cheapest snack cost 200 copper coins per serving. The Peking duck cost 2,000 copper coins per serving. Even Reed Restaurant's roast pig was only 5,000 copper coins, but that was enough for 6 people to eat at the same time. Furthermore, Reed Restaurant was a century-old restaurant. How could a restaurant that had been open for less than half a year compare to it? The spicy grilled fish won the best dish of the palace banquet that day, but this dish should be counted as part of the seafood rankings. There was also a braised chicken and rice and a black pepper steak in the palace banquet that day. There was soup in the braised chicken, so I wonder if it would be counted as part of the soup rankings. In that case, let's try the black pepper steak, roast beef kebab, Peking duck. Avis looked at the dish labeled new product in red, and pondered. Why don't we try this red braised pork first? Creating a new product is the best way to test a chef's ability. Yarbemia came to Avis' table, and asked with a smile, "What would you like to order?" Avis wasn't in a hurry to answer. Instead, he looked up at Yarbemia and asked, "May I ask what kind of meat is used for this red braised pork?" "This red braised pork is cooked with the pork of the fiery pig," Yarbemia replied with a smile. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com wonderful book mobile version website, .com. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.